Close your eyes and let your mind drift as we explore the quiet mysteries of our ancient world, the whisper of forgotten time. What if the story of our world is not as simple as we think? As you settle into comfort tonight, let your imagination wander to a possibility both ancient and profound. We are told that human history stretches back only a few thousand years, a mere blink in the vast eye of time. Yet scattered across our world lie clues that suggest something far stranger, far more mysterious than the neat timeline we've been taught. Picture ruins that should not exist, standing silent in forgotten corners of the earth. Imagine myths that repeat across cultures and continents, telling the same stories in different voices. Envision landscapes that carry scars of immense destruction, wounds in the earth that speak of catastrophes beyond our recorded memory. Tonight, as sleep approaches, we will explore the quiet possibility that Earth has been reset thousands of times. When we hear the word reset, our modern minds often think of something quick and simple: pressing a button on a machine, restarting a computer, beginning anew with the touch of a finger. But when we imagine the Earth resetting, it becomes something much more profound, much more mysterious. It is not a single moment, but a slow, powerful process that unfolds across thousands of years, like a great tide that rises and falls in cycles too vast for any single lifetime to witness. A reset in this sense does not only mean destruction, though destruction plays its part. It means transformation, the kind of deep, fundamental change that reshapes not just the surface of the world, but the very memory of what came before. Old worlds end, not with a bang but with a gradual fading, like a candle slowly burning down in the darkness. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, something new begins. In human stories passed down through countless generations, this idea appears in many forms, like variations on an ancient song. Some cultures describe a great flood that covered the earth, waters rising until mountains became islands and islands disappeared entirely. Others tell of fire from the sky, celestial flames that swept across the land, turning forests to ash and cities to dust. Still others speak of periods of darkness, times when the sun itself seemed to disappear, leaving the world cold and empty for years beyond counting. At first glance, these myths seem different, products of different peoples in different lands. But when we look closer, with the patience of a detective examining scattered clues, they all share the same fundamental structure. The world becomes unlivable. Life is nearly wiped away, hanging by the thinnest of threads. And then, after a time of darkness and struggle, something new starts. It is as though people across the world, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, remembered the same event but described it in their own words, shaped by their own understanding. If Earth has indeed been reset many times, it would explain some of the puzzles that surround our understanding of the past, mysteries that have troubled scholars and dreamers for generations. We look at our timeline of history, and it feels short, almost suspiciously short for the vast age of our planet. Civilization, as we know it, is said to be only 6,000 or 7,000 years old. Agriculture, writing, cities, and all the things we call progress are thought to have begun only recently in geological terms, like flowers blooming in the last few minutes of a year-long season. Yet the Earth itself is over 4 billion years old, a span of time so vast that our minds struggle to comprehend it. And humans in their modern form have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps much longer. What was happening during all that time? Were our ancestors really doing nothing, living in exactly the same way for unthinkable ages until suddenly, almost overnight, they began building temples, carving stones, and sailing across dangerous oceans? The reset theory suggests another possibility, one that might explain these puzzling gaps in our story. Perhaps civilizations did rise before. Perhaps they built things we cannot easily imagine, created knowledge we have yet to rediscover. Perhaps they lived in ways that do not fit our assumptions about ancient life, ways that challenge everything we think we know about the past. But then something happened. The world changed, as it has changed many times before. Ice returned to cover vast continents, or seas rose to swallow coastal lands, or fire swept across the earth from sky or volcano. Entire populations may have been lost, their accumulated wisdom scattered like leaves in an autumn wind. The traces of their culture were buried under soil and sand and ocean, covered by the patient work of time and weather. Over thousands and tens of thousands of years, nature covered everything. Mountains shifted like sleeping giants changing position. Rivers carved new paths through the landscape, abandoning their old beds. The evidence of previous worlds became difficult to recognize, hidden beneath layers of sediment and the steady growth of forests and grasslands. This may sound like science fiction, like the imaginings of dreamers and storytellers. But when we look at the geological record with careful eyes, we find constant reminders of immense shifts and changes. Species have vanished many times in what scientists call mass extinctions, great dyings that swept away whole categories of life. Each extinction was followed by a slow rebuilding, new forms emerging from the survivors, filling empty niches in a changed world. If nature itself has been reset time and again, if life has repeatedly faced near extinction and found ways to continue, why should humanity be any different? Why should we be exempt from the great cycles that govern everything else on Earth? The idea does not require us to believe in something impossible or magical. It only asks us to consider that human history could be part of the same vast cycle that affects every other form of life on our planet. We are not separate from nature. We are part of it, subject to the same forces that shape the destiny of forests and oceans, mountains and valleys. So when we talk about resets, we are not only imagining floods or comets or volcanic eruptions, though all of these have played their parts. We are imagining the possibility that Earth itself moves in rhythms, great cycles of destruction and renewal that operate on timescales far beyond our ordinary understanding. We are imagining that our place in history may not be unique, that we may be only one of many layers, with countless others hidden below us, waiting quietly in the deep time of the planet. The fading traces when we search for evidence of forgotten civilizations. We often expect clear signs, grand cities standing intact, tools gleaming in museum cases, writings carved deeply into lasting stone. But what if most evidence has already been erased? What if time itself is the greatest destroyer, more thorough than any army, more patient than any conqueror? The Earth is not a museum that preserves everything exactly as it was, maintaining perfect records for future archaeologists to discover. It is a restless, dynamic surface, constantly reshaping itself through forces both gentle and violent. Mountains rise grain by grain over millions of years, then crumble just as slowly. Rivers carve through valleys like patient sculptors, carrying away entire hillsides particle by particle. Forests grow thick and green, then disappear beneath ice or desert or ocean. The boundaries of land and sea shift like the borders of ancient kingdoms, drawn and redrawn by forces beyond human control. Over the span of just a few thousand years, a brief moment in geological time, an entire city can vanish beneath soil or sea. Stone foundations crack and crumble. Metal tools rust away to nothing. Wooden structures rot and return to earth. Even the hardest materials gradually surrender to wind and rain, to the freeze and thaw of seasons, to the steady work of roots and chemicals and time. Over tens of thousands of years, almost nothing recognizable would remain. The pyramids of Egypt, which seem so permanent to us, are only a few thousand years old, and already they show the wearing effects of time. Imagine what they will look like in 10,000 years, or 50,000. The stone will crack and fall. Sand will cover what remains. Eventually, they too will become mysterious mounds in the desert, puzzling future archaeologists who might wonder what ancient people built there and why. Even so, there are strange hints scattered across our world that do not fit comfortably in the official timeline of history. In places like Turkey, India, and South America, archaeologists have uncovered structures far older than anyone expected, ruins that challenge our assumptions about when and how civilization began. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is perhaps the most famous and most puzzling of these discoveries. It is a vast ceremonial site made of enormous carved stones, some weighing many tons, arranged in precise circles and decorated with intricate animal figures. Carbon dating places it at least 12,000 years old, thousands of years before writing, agriculture, or permanent settlements were supposed to exist anywhere in the world. According to the traditional view of history, the people who built Göbekli Tepe should have been simple hunter-gatherers, small bands of humans living day to day, focused entirely on survival. Yet here, we find them working together to move massive stones, to carve intricate symbols with meaning we can only guess at, to build a structure that required not just knowledge and organization, but a vision of something greater than immediate needs. The site required planning that spanned generations. It demanded cooperation between many groups of people. It suggested a society complex enough to support specialist people who could be freed from the daily search for food to become artists, architects, and builders. This was supposed to be impossible in that era, yet the evidence stands before us, carved in stone. Göbekli Tepe is not alone in challenging our timeline. Off the coast of Japan, beneath the clear waters near Yonaguni, there lies a set of stone formations that have sparked decades of debate. The structures look remarkably like terraces and steps, with straight edges and right angles that seem too regular to be natural. Some researchers believe they are simply the result of natural geological processes, rock layers that split along natural fault lines and were shaped by erosion. But others argue they show clear signs of deliberate human construction: walls, stairs, and platforms arranged in ways that suggest purpose and planning. If the Yonaguni structures are indeed man-made, they would represent something extraordinary. The area where they lie was above sea level more than 10,000 years ago, before the great melting at the end of the last ice age. This would mean that people were building complex stone structures in that remote time, long before the official history of civilization allows for such achievements. In India, there are submerged ruins near the ancient city of Dwarka, mentioned in sacred texts as a great port that eventually sank beneath the waves. These underwater remains now rest under many feet of seawater, suggesting they were built before sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Archaeological diving expeditions have found stone structures, pottery fragments, and other artifacts that speak of a sophisticated society that once thrived where only fish swim today. Across the world, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean, from the North Sea to the Pacific, there are scattered stories of cities lost beneath the waves. Mainstream history often treats these as legends, colorful tales told around ancient fires. But the ongoing discovery of actual submerged ruins forces us to reconsider. Perhaps some of these legends preserve memories of real places, real civilizations that vanished when the waters rose. These underwater anomalies are important because they do not fit the neat, linear story we tell ourselves about civilization's rise. If we accept the possibility of resets, they suddenly make perfect sense. A people may have developed advanced skills and accumulated vast knowledge, only to be erased by catastrophe. What remains are broken fragments, clues without context, puzzle pieces from a picture we can no longer see clearly. Later, when humanity rises again in the great cycle, these fragments become mysterious outliers. Modern archaeologists look at them with puzzlement and say, this should not be here. This does not fit our timeline. But perhaps they are exactly what we should expect: remnants of the last cycle, surviving traces of worlds that came before. It is easy to forget how fragile all evidence of human activity really is. A modern city, if abandoned today and left to the mercy of nature, would begin to decay almost immediately. Within just a few hundred years, vegetation would cover concrete and steel. Metal would corrode away. Wood would rot and return to soil. Glass would crack and shatter. The careful organization of streets and buildings would dissolve into chaos. After 1,000 years, most structures would have collapsed entirely. After 10,000 years, it would be difficult to see much at all, just strange mounds in the landscape and the occasional fragment of unusually hard stone. Add the effects of another ice age, or rising seas, or massive volcanic activity, and almost nothing would remain to tell the story of what once was. If advanced civilizations lived here before us, we should not expect to find complete cities waiting intact for our discovery. We should expect only fragments, puzzling ruins, scattered artifacts, and stories passed down through generations of survivors. These traces remind us that history may be far older and far less simple than we have been told. They suggest that the story of humanity could be one of cycles, each new civilization rising on the hidden foundations of the last. The mystery of sudden disappearances, one of the most unsettling aspects of human history, when viewed with careful attention, is how often things seem to simply disappear. We look at the archaeological record and find long stretches of relative silence, followed suddenly by bursts of intense activity. Whole cultures appear fully formed, flourish for centuries or millennia, then vanish without clear explanation, leaving behind only ruins and questions. This uneven pattern is difficult to explain if civilization has been a single, continuous climb from simple beginnings to complex societies. The story should be smooth, gradual, with each generation building steadily on the achievements of the last. But if resets are real, if the earth has indeed been swept clean many times, then this pattern of sudden appearances and mysterious disappearances begins to look different. It becomes not an anomaly, but the natural rhythm of destruction and renewal, played out across vast stretches of time. Consider the Maya civilization, one of the most sophisticated cultures of the ancient Americas. For more than 2,000 years, they built grand cities deep in the jungles of Central America. Their pyramids reached toward the sky like stone mountains. Their observatories tracked the movements of planets with precision that rivals modern astronomy, and their calendars measured time with mathematical elegance that speaks of minds both practical and profound. Maya cities bustled with life. Markets filled with traders from distant lands. Artists carved intricate sculptures that captured both religious devotion and everyday life. Scribes recorded history in a writing system so complex that scholars are still working to understand all its subtleties. The Maya developed advanced agriculture, sophisticated architecture, and an understanding of mathematics that included the concept of zero long before it appeared in Europe. Then, around the 9th century of our era, something changed. One by one, the great Maya cities were abandoned. The jungle began to reclaim their pyramids and palaces. People scattered into smaller communities, carrying with them only fragments of the knowledge their ancestors had accumulated. The great flowering of Maya civilization simply ended, leaving modern archaeologists to debate endlessly about why. Was it drought? Archaeological evidence suggests that the region experienced severe dry periods that could have disrupted agriculture and led to social collapse. Was it warfare? Some cities show signs of conflict and destruction. Was it disease? Epidemics could have swept through densely populated centers, killing specialists and disrupting the complex social structures that kept civilization functioning. Perhaps it was all of these factors combined, each weakness feeding the others until the entire system could no longer support itself. But the result is the same. A civilization that had reached impressive heights simply disappeared into the forest, leaving only ruins behind to mark its passing. On a much larger scale, we see something similar when we look at the broader sweep of human prehistory. Anatomically modern humans, people with bodies and brains essentially identical to ours, are said to have existed for at least 200,000 years, possibly much longer. Yet for most of that immense span of time, the archaeological record is strangely quiet. Stone tools remain simple and virtually unchanged for tens of thousands of years. The same basic designs appear again and again, as if human innovation had somehow frozen in place. There are few signs of art, little evidence of symbolic thought, no indication of the creative explosion that we associate with human consciousness. Then, suddenly, around 40,000 years ago, everything changes. Cave paintings appear in Europe, showing not just simple drawings but sophisticated artistic techniques and symbolic thinking. Sculpture emerges, with carved figurines that suggest religious or magical beliefs. Advanced hunting tools spread rapidly across continents. Music appears in the form of bone flutes. Complex burial practices develop, indicating beliefs about death and afterlife. This period is often called the Great Leap Forward, or the creative explosion, a sudden flowering of human culture and innovation that transforms the archaeological record. But why did this happen so suddenly? If humanity had possessed the same brain and body for hundreds of thousands of years, why wait so long to begin the journey toward civilization? Some researchers suggest that a genetic mutation triggered this leap, some small change in brain structure that suddenly unlocked human creativity. Others point to the development of complex language as the key factor, arguing that once humans could communicate abstract ideas with precision, culture could begin to accumulate and grow. But there is another possibility, one that fits with the idea of resets. Perhaps humanity did not wait. Perhaps there were earlier attempts at culture and civilization, earlier periods when human societies developed art, technology, and complex social structures. But these earlier achievements were lost, swept away by catastrophe and environmental change. If a reset occurred, whether through climate change, volcanic eruption, asteroid impact, or some other global catastrophe, it would leave only small groups of survivors scattered across the landscape. These groups would lose knowledge quickly. Complex skills like agriculture, architecture, navigation, and mathematics cannot survive long without a supporting society to maintain and teach them. The survivors would be forced to return to a simpler way of life, using basic stone tools and temporary shelters, focused entirely on the immediate needs of survival. Much of their ancestors' accumulated wisdom would die with the specialists who possessed it. Writing systems would be forgotten when there was no longer a need to keep complex records. Artistic traditions would disappear when daily survival took precedence over creative expression. Only later, when stability returned and populations grew large enough to support specialization again, would the slow process of rebuilding begin. To future archaeologists, it would look as though civilization suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But in reality, it might have been rediscovered, rebuilt from fragments of memory and the innate human drive to create and explore. There is also the puzzle of entire human populations disappearing without clear cause. The Neanderthals, our closest relatives, lived across Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were strong, intelligent, and capable of creating tools, art, and even jewelry. They survived ice ages, adapted to different environments, and developed their own cultural traditions. Yet around 30,000 years ago, they vanished. Modern humans, spreading out of Africa, encountered Neanderthal populations across Europe and Asia. For a time, the two species coexisted. Even interbred traces of Neanderthal DNA can still be found in most people of European and Asian descent today. But then the Neanderthals disappeared completely, leaving only their genetic legacy in our own cells. Why did this happen? Was it competition with modern humans? Disease brought by contact with new populations? A sudden environmental crisis that affected one species more than the other? Some researchers suggest that Neanderthals may have been caught in one of these great resets, some catastrophic event that they were unable to survive, while modern humans managed to endure. Their disappearance becomes part of a larger pattern, another example of how quickly even successful populations can vanish when conditions change. What is striking, when we step back and look at the broad patterns of history, is that disappearance is far more common than survival. Civilizations collapse with remarkable regularity. Species vanish from the fossil record. Landscapes transform beyond recognition. Only fragments remain to tell us what once was. If we look at Earth through this lens, it feels less like a steady climb toward progress, and more like a series of experiments, each one testing the limits of what life can achieve before the next reset sweeps the board clean. Each disappearance becomes part of a larger story, not of failure, but of cycles, the eternal rhythm of rise and fall that may be fundamental to how our planet works. Perhaps the reason the past feels incomplete to us is that it truly is incomplete. Perhaps we are looking only at the most recent attempt, the latest in a long series of beginnings, while countless others lie buried deeper in the layers of time, erased by the patient work of ice and water, fire and wind. The Earth's violent memory when we turn from the mysteries of archaeology to the hard evidence of geology. The idea of repeated resets becomes not just plausible but almost inevitable. The Earth itself carries scars of immense destruction, written into its layers of rock and ice like a violent diary spanning millions of years. Scientists have long studied these layers to understand our planet's past, reading them like pages in an ancient book. And what they reveal is not a gentle, steady story of gradual change, but one marked by sudden, violent interruptions, catastrophes so severe that they reshape not just the surface of the world, but the very nature of life itself. One of the clearest patterns in Earth's history is the cycle of ice ages. For millions of years, our planet's climate has swung back and forth between warm periods and long stretches of bitter cold. During the cold periods, vast sheets of ice covered much of the northern hemisphere, burying entire continents under kilometers of frozen mass that ground slowly across the landscape like enormous bulldozers. These ice sheets were not thin layers of snow and frost. They were mountains of ice, sometimes more than a mile thick, heavy enough to press the very bedrock of continents down into the underlying mantle. When the ice finally retreated, the land would slowly rise again, like a foam cushion recovering from the weight of a heavy sleeper. During the height of the last ice age, which ended only 12,000 years ago, ice covered most of what is now Canada and the northern United States. The great cities of Chicago, Detroit, and Minneapolis lay beneath glaciers. In Europe, ice stretched from Scandinavia south into Germany and across the British Isles. Much of northern Asia was similarly entombed. The ice locked up so much of the world's water that sea levels dropped by more than 400 feet. Coastlines extended far beyond their present boundaries. Land bridges connected continents that are now separated by deep oceans. The Bering Land Bridge linked Asia and North America. Britain was connected to continental Europe. Indonesia was joined to mainland Asia. Australia and New Guinea formed a single continent. When the ice finally began to melt, the transformation was dramatic. Sea levels rose rapidly, flooding vast areas of low-lying land. Entire regions that had been home to plants, animals, and possibly human settlements disappeared beneath the waves. Coastal plains that had been exposed for thousands of years were swallowed by the returning ocean. This cycle of freezing and melting has repeated many times throughout Earth's history, reshaping the planet again and again. Each cycle would have been catastrophic for any complex society that existed during the transition. Imagine trying to maintain a civilization while glaciers advanced across the landscape, covering fertile farmland with ice and forcing entire populations to migrate toward the equator. If civilizations had lived along the ancient shorelines that are now submerged, much of their world would be hidden beneath hundreds of feet of seawater, beyond the reach of ordinary archaeological investigation. Their coastal cities, their ports, their monuments all would lie in the deep ocean, covered by sediment and forgotten by time. We also find evidence of sudden, catastrophic events that make even ice ages seem gradual by comparison. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, something very unusual happened. The climate, which had been warming steadily as the glaciers retreated, suddenly plunged back into freezing conditions for more than 1,000 years. This event is known to scientists as the Younger Dryas, named after an Arctic flower that began growing again in regions that had started to warm. For reasons that are still debated, the world suddenly returned to near-glacial conditions, just as it seemed to be emerging from the Ice Age. Temperatures dropped dramatically. Glaciers began advancing again. The brief spring of the world turned back into winter. Some researchers believe this rapid climate change was caused by a comet or asteroid impact. They point to a thin layer of material found in rocks of this age, containing unusual concentrations of rare metals and tiny spheres of glass that could have been created by an extraterrestrial impact. Such an impact could have triggered massive fires across continents, injected dust and debris into the atmosphere, and disrupted ocean currents that regulate global climate. If a significant civilization existed at the end of the Ice Age, this event would have been devastating. Imagine a society that had adapted to warming conditions, perhaps developing agriculture in the fertile lands newly freed from ice, suddenly facing a return to Arctic cold that lasted for more than a millennium. Crops would fail. Populations would have to migrate or face starvation. Complex social structures would collapse under the pressure of simple survival. The survivors of such an event would face an environment turned hostile almost overnight. Even if they carried memories of better times, of warmer climates and more prosperous societies, those memories would seem like dreams in the face of the harsh new reality. Within a few generations, stories of the time before might become myths, tales of a golden age lost to darkness and cold. Even further back in Earth's history, we see signs of cataclysms on a truly global scale. Roughly 65 million years ago, a giant asteroid struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater, a wound in the Earth more than 100 miles across. The impact sent debris flying into space, much of which fell back as a rain of molten rock that set fires around the globe. Dust and vaporized rock filled the atmosphere, blocking sunlight for months or possibly years. Global temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis largely stopped as plants could not capture enough light to survive. Food chains collapsed from the bottom up. This event wiped out roughly 3/4 of all species on Earth, including the dinosaurs that had dominated terrestrial ecosystems for more than 150 million years. Life eventually returned, but in entirely new forms. Mammals, which had been small, nocturnal creatures during the age of dinosaurs, suddenly had the opportunity to diversify and grow large. The world was reset, and evolution began exploring new possibilities. The lesson is clear. Earth has been reset before, not just once but many times throughout its long history. These resets operated on different scales and through different mechanisms, but their effect was always the same: the old world ended, and a new one began. Volcanic eruptions have also played their part in this cosmic drama. Around 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in Indonesia erupted with such devastating force that it ranks as one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. The eruption ejected so much ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that it caused a volcanic winter, a period of global cooling that may have lasted for years. Ash from Toba has been found in sediment layers across South and Southeast Asia, and evidence of the cooling event appears in ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica. The eruption may have reduced global temperatures by several degrees Celsius, enough to disrupt agriculture and cause widespread famine. Genetic studies of modern humans suggest that our species may have passed through a severe population bottleneck around this time, with the total number of humans dropping to perhaps as few as 10,000 individuals worldwide. If this interpretation is correct, then we are all descendants of a small group of survivors who managed to endure one of the most severe environmental crises in human prehistory. This near-extinction event represents a reset on a smaller, but still profound scale. If complex human societies existed before the Toba eruption, they would have faced conditions that challenged their very survival. Most specialized knowledge would have been lost as communities focused on basic needs. Cultural achievements would have vanished as populations scattered and struggled to maintain even simple social structures. All of this evidence shows that Earth is not a stable stage upon which civilization calmly unfolds, developing steadily from simple to complex. Instead, it is a dynamic, often hostile environment, one that can change suddenly and without warning. Floods, impacts, eruptions, and advancing ice have all shaped its surface again and again, creating a cycle of destruction and renewal that has operated for billions of years. If we imagine that civilizations existed in earlier ages, it becomes easy to see how they could have been erased by these natural forces. Their cities would be crushed by advancing glaciers, drowned by rising seas, burned by volcanic fires, or buried under layers of ash and debris. Only scattered fragments might survive, hidden in places we have not yet learned to look, or preserved under conditions so rare that they seem miraculous. The geological record teaches us that resets are not only possible, they are part of the natural history of our planet. The question is not whether resets happen, but whether human civilization has been caught in their path more often than we realize, and whether our own apparently unique achievements are actually the latest chapter in a much older story of rise, fall, and rise again. The universal flood. When we examine ancient myths from cultures around the world, we discover something remarkable and puzzling. Civilizations separated by vast oceans and thousands of years often tell strikingly similar stories of destruction and renewal. At first glance, these tales might seem like simple moral lessons or symbolic stories meant to teach about the relationship between humanity and the divine. But when we compare them closely, the similarities become so specific and so widespread that they begin to suggest something more. They sound less like independent inventions and more like memories passed down through generations of survivors. The most pervasive and detailed of these shared memories involves great floods that covered the earth, destroying almost everything and forcing humanity to begin again. The story appears in so many cultures, with such consistent details, that it has become known as the universal flood myth. In the Western world, many people know the biblical story of Noah and the Ark, in which God decides to cleanse the world with a great flood, sparing only one righteous family and representatives of all animal species. Noah builds a massive boat according to divine instructions, gathers his family and the animals, and rides out the flood that covers even the highest mountains. When the waters finally recede, Noah's family becomes the seed of a new humanity. But this story did not originate in the Bible. Long before the Hebrew scriptures were written, the peoples of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where some of the world's first cities arose, told a nearly identical tale. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's earliest known works of literature, we meet Utnapishtim, a man who survived a great flood sent by the gods. Like Noah, Utnapishtim is warned in advance of the coming disaster. Like Noah, he is instructed to build a great boat and to take aboard his family and representatives of all living creatures. Like Noah, he releases birds to test whether the waters have receded enough for safe landing. The parallels are so exact that scholars believe the biblical account must have been influenced by these much older Mesopotamian stories. But the flood narrative extends far beyond the Middle East. In ancient India, the Puranas tell of Manu, the first man, who is warned by Vishnu of a coming deluge that will destroy all life. Manu builds a great ship and saves the seeds of all creation, becoming the ancestor of the human race that emerges after the waters recede. In Greece, the myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha describes how Zeus, angered by human wickedness, decides to flood the world. Only this virtuous couple survives, riding out the disaster in a wooden ark. When the flood ends, they repopulate the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, which magically transform into human beings. The flood story appears throughout the Americas as well, among peoples who had no contact with the old world for thousands of years. The Maya speak of earlier ages of creation, each destroyed in turn. In one version, the world is destroyed by a great flood, with only a few humans surviving to become the ancestors of the current age. Native American tribes across North America preserve flood traditions. The Ojibwe tell of Nanabajo, who survives a great flood by floating on a log with various animals. The Hopi describe how their ancestors climbed into hollow reeds to escape rising waters that covered the previous world. Tribes in the Pacific Northwest, despite living in a region where floods are common and might explain such stories, tell of a deluge so vast that it covered even the highest mountains. In South America, the Inca preserved stories of a great flood, sent by the creator god Viracocha to punish humanity for its sins. Only one man and one woman survived on a floating box, and from them came all future generations. The details vary from tribe to tribe, but the essential structure remains constant. A world-destroying flood, a few survivors, and a new beginning for humanity. Even in the isolated Pacific, Polynesian cultures maintain traditions of great floods that reshaped their island world. Hawaiian legends speak of times when the ocean rose to cover all but the highest peaks. Tahitian myths describe how the god Tauhiramadia sent floods to destroy the land, sparing only those who found refuge on the mountain tops. What makes these flood stories so compelling is not just their worldwide distribution, but their specific details. They don't simply describe heavy rains or river flooding natural disasters that occur regularly in most parts of the world. Instead, they describe a global catastrophe that covers the highest land, threatens all life, and forces humanity to start over from almost nothing. The stories also share common elements that seem too specific to be coincidental. The survivors are often warned in advance by a divine figure. They frequently save themselves by building boats or finding other means of floating on the rising waters. They often preserve animals or seeds to repopulate the devastated world, and they typically become the ancestors of all subsequent humanity. If these were simply symbolic stories about moral renewal or the relationship between humanity and nature, we might expect more variation in their details. Symbolic stories tend to change significantly as they pass from culture to culture, adapted to local conditions and beliefs. But flood myths maintain their essential structure with remarkable consistency, as if they all derive from memory of the same event. Modern geology provides a possible explanation for these widespread flood memories. At the end of the last ice age, beginning around 15,000 years ago and accelerating around 12,000 years ago, global sea levels rose dramatically as enormous ice sheets melted. The rise was not gradual, it occurred in sudden jumps as ice dams burst and vast glacial lakes emptied into the oceans. The most dramatic of these events may have been the draining of Lake Agassiz, a glacial lake larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined, which covered much of central North America. When the ice dam holding back this enormous body of water finally failed, it released a volume of fresh water that significantly raised global sea levels almost overnight. Coastal plains that had been exposed for thousands of years during the Ice Age were suddenly submerged. Land bridges that had connected continents disappeared beneath the waves. Rivers that had carved deep valleys during the period of low sea level were drowned, becoming bays and estuaries. Entire landscapes vanished beneath the rising waters. For people living along the ancient coastlines, this would have been a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Coastal areas are typically the most fertile and heavily populated regions, supporting the largest communities and most complex societies. If advanced civilizations existed during the Ice Age, they would likely have been concentrated along the coasts of the time, which are now hundreds of feet underwater. The flood stories may preserve cultural memories of this great drowning, passed down through thousands of years of oral tradition. The details would naturally change as the stories were retold, taking on religious significance and moral meaning. But the core memory might remain. The world was once different, the waters rose, almost everything was lost, and humanity had to begin again. This interpretation gains strength when we consider that flood myths are not evenly distributed around the world. They are most common and most detailed in regions that would have been most affected by post-glacial flooding, coastal areas, river deltas, and regions where glacial lakes once existed. Areas that were less affected by the Great Melting tend to have fewer flood stories, or stories that focus on other types of catastrophe. The flood myths also echo the very patterns we see in geology. They describe not just rising water, but a world transformed, landscapes drowned, climate changed, familiar places made unrecognizable. They speak of survival through adaptation and the need to preserve knowledge and life for future generations. Most tellingly, they describe the flood not as the end of the world, but as a reset, a clearing away of the old to make room for the new. If these stories do preserve memories of real events, they represent something extraordinary: the survival of cultural memory across more than 10,000 years, maintained through countless generations by the simple human act of telling stories. They would be among our oldest historical records, not written on clay tablets or carved in stone, but preserved in the living memory of our species. But flood myths also serve another purpose in the context of resets. They remind us that such catastrophes are possible, that the world can change dramatically and quickly, and that survival depends on preparation, wisdom, and the ability to adapt. They function as warnings encoded in cultural memory, passed down from ancestors who witnessed changes so profound that they felt compelled to preserve the memory for their descendants. Whether or not the flood myths describe literal historical events, they reflect a deep human understanding of cyclical time, the idea that the world goes through phases of destruction and renewal, that what seems permanent can vanish quickly, and that life always finds a way to continue. They prepare us psychologically for the possibility of change, even catastrophic change, and they teach us that survival is possible even when everything familiar disappears. In this way, the universal flood becomes more than just a story about the past. It becomes a template for understanding how resets work, how they arrive suddenly, how they transform everything, and how new worlds emerge from the survivors of the old. The flood is both memory and prophecy, a reminder of what has been and a warning of what might come again. The compressed timeline of history, when we step back and examine the official timeline of human civilization, something feels strange about its proportions, almost artificially compressed. According to mainstream understanding, the story of organized human society begins only about 6,000 years ago with the rise of the first cities in Mesopotamia, the development of writing systems, and the emergence of complex social hierarchies. Before that pivotal moment, we are told, people lived essentially the same way for tens of thousands of years, small groups of hunter-gatherers moving across the landscape, following herds and seasons, leaving behind only stone tools and occasional cave paintings. The transition from this simple existence to complex civilization is presented as relatively sudden, a rapid acceleration that occurred almost overnight in geological terms. But when we consider that anatomically modern humans have existed for at least 200,000 years, possibly much longer, this timeline becomes puzzling. Why would all of civilization suddenly appear so late in our species' history? What were people doing during all those earlier millennia? The standard explanation suggests that for most of human existence, our ancestors were limited by their environment and their knowledge. They had not yet discovered agriculture, which would allow them to settle in one place and support larger populations. They had not developed writing, which would allow them to accumulate and transmit complex knowledge. They had not learned to work metals, which would give them better tools and weapons. According to this view, civilization required a series of specific discoveries and innovations that built upon each other: agriculture leading to permanent settlements leading to specialization of labor, specialization leading to technological advancement, and so on. Until all the pieces fell into place, complex society was simply impossible. But this explanation raises as many questions as it answers. Human beings are naturally innovative creatures. Even in small groups, they develop sophisticated techniques for surviving in their environment. They create complex social structures, intricate mythologies, and elaborate artistic traditions. In the span of just a few millennia, a tiny fraction of our species' existence, we went from stone tools to space travel. Why should we believe that in the hundreds of thousands of years before recorded history, nothing significant ever happened? The possibility of lost ages offers a different answer. Perhaps there were civilizations before the ones we know about, but they did not survive to become part of the official record. Perhaps the compressed timeline we see is not the result of a single, linear development, but the latest chapter in a much longer story of rise and fall. If earlier civilizations were destroyed by resets, their traces could be buried, eroded, or submerged, leaving us with little more than fragments and mysteries. Over such vast stretches of time, even the most impressive stone buildings would crumble, metals would corrode completely, and organic materials would vanish without a trace. Only scattered anomalies might remain, things that do not fit comfortably in the accepted timeline. Some researchers point to ancient maps as one type of evidence for lost knowledge. The Piri Reis map, drawn in the early 16th century by an Ottoman admiral, appears to show parts of Antarctica's coastline as it would look without ice. This is puzzling because Antarctica has been covered by ice for thousands of years, and the continent was not officially discovered until the 19th century. Admiral Piri Reis noted that his map was compiled from many older sources, some of which were ancient even in his time. If the map is accurate, it suggests that someone in the distant past had knowledge of Antarctica's true coastline, knowledge that could only have been gained when the continent was ice-free, before the end of the last ice age. Similar anomalies appear in other ancient maps. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 also shows Antarctica without ice, including rivers and mountain ranges. The Buech map of 1737 depicts the continent divided by a waterway, a feature that modern science confirmed only after extensive exploration beneath the ice sheet. These maps could be dismissed as lucky guesses or artistic imagination, but their accuracy in depicting features that were supposedly unknown until modern times is difficult to explain. If they were copied from much older sources, they might represent fragments of geographical knowledge accumulated by seafaring civilizations that existed before recorded history. There are also the megalithic sites scattered around the world, places like Stonehenge in England, the Moai statues of Easter Island, and the precisely cut stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia. These monuments raise questions about who built them, how they were constructed, and why they were created. Some show evidence of advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge that seems out of place for the time periods to which they are assigned. Mainstream archaeology attributes these achievements to the ingenuity of relatively simple societies, arguing that human determination and organization can accomplish remarkable things even with basic tools. While this is certainly true, it is worth considering whether these monuments might represent surviving evidence of more advanced knowledge, fragments of earlier civilizations that possess techniques we have yet to rediscover. Another clue lies in the myths and traditions of ancient cultures. Many societies preserve stories of earlier ages of humanity, cycles of creation and destruction that stretch back into the remote past. The Aztecs believed they were living in the fifth sun, meaning there had been 4 earlier creations, each destroyed in turn. Hindu cosmology describes vast cycles of time, with each age ending in dissolution before a new one begins. These stories might be dismissed as pure mythology, products of human imagination trying to make sense of an uncertain world. But they could also reflect cultural memories of actual cycles, periods when civilizations rose and fell, when knowledge was gained and lost, when humanity repeatedly climbed toward complexity only to be thrown back to simpler beginnings. If lost ages did exist, it would explain why history feels incomplete, why there are so many gaps and sudden leaps in the archaeological record. We would not be looking at a single, unbroken story of human development, but at the latest chapter in a much longer series, each cycle leaving behind only traces too scattered and faint to be easily recognized. What we call the beginning of civilization might simply be the most recent attempt, the latest emergence of complex society from the survivors of an earlier reset. The knowledge and techniques that seem to appear suddenly in the archaeological record might actually be rediscoveries, innovations that had been achieved before but were lost when the previous world ended. This perspective changes how we think about human potential and human history. Instead of seeing ourselves as the first to reach our current level of complexity, we might be part of a recurring pattern, the latest expression of capabilities that our species has achieved many times before. The compressed timeline of official history might conceal a much deeper story, one written in cycles of destruction and renewal that extend far beyond the reach of written records. In this view, the silence of the deep past is not empty but full of possibility. Each gap in the record might represent not the absence of human activity, but the aftermath of destruction, the pause between cycles when survivors rebuild slowly from fragments of memory and scattered remnants of what came before. The silence of deep time when we look back into the deepest reaches of human history, The silence is profound and unsettling. For the vast majority of our species' existence, perhaps 95% of the time that anatomically modern humans have walked the earth, we see almost nothing in the archaeological record. No monumental architecture, no clear evidence of complex social organization, no signs of the creative and technological capabilities that we know our ancestors possessed. This silence is typically interpreted as evidence of absence, the assumption being that if we don't find traces of complex activity, then such activity simply didn't occur. Our ancestors are portrayed as living in a kind of cultural stasis, using the same basic stone tools for tens of thousands of years, following the same simple patterns of life generation after generation. But is this silence really an absence, or could it be a loss? Is it possible that the archaeological record is incomplete not because nothing happened, but because almost everything that did happen has been erased by the passage of time and the dynamic forces that continuously reshape our planet? This question becomes more pressing when we consider the nature of preservation itself. The Earth is not a gentle repository that carefully maintains everything for future study. It is a restless, active system where the forces of erosion, weathering, and geological change work constantly to break down and recycle all materials on its surface. Organic materials, wood, leather, textiles, paper decay rapidly under most conditions. Even in ideal circumstances, they rarely survive more than a few thousand years. Metals corrode and crumble. Stone weathers and crumbles. Only under very specific conditions, extreme cold, perfect dryness, or rapid burial in just the right type of sediment, can artifacts survive for tens of thousands of years. Consider what would happen to our own civilization if it were abandoned today. Within decades, wooden structures would begin to rot. Within centuries, most metal would corrode beyond recognition. Glass would crack and shatter. Concrete would crumble as freeze-thaw cycles and plant roots gradually broke it apart. Within a few thousand years, most evidence of our technological society would be reduced to scattered fragments buried under accumulating layers of soil and debris. Add the effects of multiple ice ages, rising and falling sea levels, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes, and it becomes clear that almost nothing from tens of thousands of years ago would remain visible on the surface. If advanced societies existed in earlier epochs, we should not expect to find their ruins standing intact. We should expect them to be erased, with only the rarest and most durable traces surviving in forms we might not even recognize. The silence of deep time might therefore reflect not the absence of achievement, but the thoroughness of destruction. Each ice age would have scraped clean vast areas of the northern continents. Each period of rising sea level would have drowned coastal civilizations. Each major volcanic eruption would have buried entire regions under ash and debris. But perhaps most significantly, the silence might reflect our own limitations as investigators. We have barely begun to explore the depths of our planet's history. The ocean floors, where much evidence of coastal civilizations might lie, remain largely unmapped and unexplored. Deep layers of sediment that might contain traces of ancient activity have been sampled only sporadically and in tiny fractions. We tend to look for the past in places where it is easy to find near the surface, in accessible locations, in forms we recognize as obviously human-made. But if we are dealing with time periods measured in tens of thousands of years, the evidence might be buried so deeply, scattered so widely, or transformed so completely that we simply don't recognize it for what it is. The silence also extends to our methods of investigation. Archaeology is a young science, and most of its techniques were developed to study relatively recent periods, the last few thousand years of recorded history. These methods may not be adequate for detecting much older and more fragmentary evidence. For example, we have become very good at recognizing the stone tools made by our ancestors over the past several thousand years. But what if earlier societies used different materials or different techniques? What if they developed technologies that left behind traces we don't know how to identify? What if their approach to tool-making was so different from what we expect that we wouldn't recognize their artifacts even if we found them? There is also the question of preservation bias. The artifacts that survive from ancient times are not a representative sample of what once existed. They are the tiny fraction that happen to be made of durable materials and happen to be buried in favorable conditions. A civilization that built primarily with wood and worked primarily with organic materials might leave almost no trace that we could recognize, even if it achieved remarkable sophistication in its own time. This silence might also reflect the pattern of resets themselves. If civilizations periodically rose and were destroyed, the survivors would face enormous challenges in maintaining their cultural achievements. Complex knowledge requires a supporting society to preserve and transmit it. When populations are scattered and reduced to small groups focused on immediate survival, much of their accumulated wisdom would die with the specialists who possessed it. Written language, mathematical techniques, astronomical observations, engineering principles, all of these require not just individual knowledge but institutional support. Schools, libraries, workshops, and guilds are needed to maintain and develop complex traditions. When these institutions collapse, the knowledge they preserve can disappear within a single generation. The survivors of a reset would necessarily return to simpler technologies and social forms, not because they lacked the intelligence to maintain complexity, but because they lacked the stable conditions and large populations that complexity requires. They might remember fragments of what their ancestors achieved, but these memories would gradually fade and transform, eventually becoming myths and legends rather than practical knowledge. Only much later, when conditions stabilized and populations grew large enough to support specialization again, would the slow process of rebuilding begin. To future archaeologists, this would appear as a sudden emergence of civilization from nowhere. But it might actually represent rediscovery rather than original discovery, the gradual recovery of capabilities that had been achieved before, but lost in the chaos of reset. The silence of deep time, viewed from this perspective, becomes not an empty void but a kind of shadow, the outline of something that once existed but has been obscured by the passage of ages. It reminds us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when dealing with time periods so vast that almost any trace of activity would naturally be erased. If Earth has been reset multiple times, then this silence is exactly what we should expect to find. It would be the natural consequence of cycles that stretch across tens of thousands of years, each one capable of erasing most traces of what came before. The few fragments that do survive, the anomalous artifacts, the puzzling ruins, the myths of lost ages, would be like scattered pages from a vast library that has been repeatedly burned and rebuilt. In this interpretation, the silence speaks as loudly as any artifact. It tells us that history might be far older and far more complex than we imagine, that our current understanding might represent only the most recent chapter in a story that began long before the first written word, and that the deepest mysteries of human achievement might lie not in what we have found, but in what we have lost. Sudden leaps and hidden connections. One of the most curious aspects of human cultural development, when examined closely, is the way progress seems to happen in sudden leaps rather than gradual steps. For long periods, sometimes stretching across thousands of years, archaeological evidence suggests that human societies remained relatively stable, using similar tools and following similar patterns of life. Then, almost without warning, culture takes a dramatic leap forward, with new technologies, artistic traditions, and social structures appearing rapidly across wide areas. These sudden transformations are difficult to explain if we imagine history as one continuous, unbroken climb from simple beginnings to complex achievements. If human development were truly gradual and cumulative, we would expect to see steady progress, with each generation building slowly on the innovations of the last. Instead, we see long periods of apparent stasis, punctuated by rapid bursts of change, a pattern that begins to make more sense when viewed through the lens of cyclical resets. Take the remarkable transformation that archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, or the Great Leap Forward. For hundreds of thousands of years, the tools made by early humans remained essentially unchanged, simple stone implements that served basic functions, but showed little innovation or artistic sophistication. The archaeological record from this period is monotonously similar across vast spans of time and geography. Then, beginning around 45,000 years ago, everything changed. Suddenly, the archaeological record explodes with evidence of sophisticated human culture. Cave paintings appear in Spain and France, showing not just simple drawings but complex artistic techniques that demonstrate abstract thinking and symbolic communication. Carved figurines emerge, including the famous Venus statuettes found across Europe, suggesting shared cultural traditions and possibly religious beliefs. Advanced tools proliferate rapidly, not just better versions of existing implements, but entirely new categories of technology. Bone needles indicate the development of tailored clothing. Spear throwers and later bow and arrow technology represent sophisticated understanding of physics and engineering. Musical instruments, including bone flutes capable of playing complex melodies, appear in the archaeological record. Perhaps most significantly, this period sees the emergence of personal ornamentation jewelry, decorated tools, and pigments used for body painting. These artifacts indicate that humans had developed a sense of individual and group identity that went beyond immediate practical needs. They were thinking symbolically, creating meaning through objects and imagery. This transformation was not limited to a single region or group. Similar changes appear across Africa, Asia, and Australia at roughly the same time, suggesting either rapid communication between distant populations or the independent development of similar capabilities by groups that had been separated for thousands of years. The speed and breadth of this change has puzzled researchers for decades. If anatomically modern humans had possessed the same basic brain structure and cognitive capabilities for hundreds of thousands of years, why did this creative explosion happen when it did rather than much earlier? What triggered such a dramatic shift in human behavior and achievement? Some scientists have suggested that a genetic mutation occurred around this time, some small change in brain structure or function that suddenly unlocked human creative potential. Others point to the development of complex language as the crucial factor, arguing that once humans could communicate abstract concepts with precision, cultural knowledge could begin to accumulate rapidly across generations. But there is another possibility, one that aligns with the concept of cyclical resets. Perhaps this revolution was not actually the first time humans had achieved such cultural sophistication. Perhaps it represents a recovery, the gradual rediscovery of capabilities that had been achieved before, but lost during an earlier period of catastrophe and social collapse. If a reset had occurred sometime before 45,000 years ago, it would have scattered human populations and forced them to focus on immediate survival rather than cultural development. Complex traditions would have been lost as specialized knowledge died with those who possessed it. Artistic skills would have been abandoned as communities struggled to maintain basic subsistence. The survivors would have reverted to simpler technologies and social forms, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked the stable conditions and large populations that cultural complexity requires. For thousands of years, they might have lived in small, scattered groups, gradually rebuilding their numbers and slowly developing the social structures necessary to support specialization again. When conditions finally stabilized and populations reached a critical threshold, the process of cultural development could have accelerated rapidly. Humans would have begun rediscovering techniques and concepts that their ancestors had known, building on half-remembered traditions and latent capabilities that had been preserved in oral culture or genetic memory. From an archaeological perspective, this recovery would look exactly like the revolution we observe, a sudden flowering of human capability appearing to emerge from nowhere, but actually representing the reactivation of potentials that had existed all along. This pattern of sudden leaps appears repeatedly throughout later human history as well. The development of agriculture provides another striking example. For most of human existence, all peoples everywhere were hunter-gatherers, obtaining their food by collecting wild plants and hunting wild animals. Then, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, agriculture appears almost simultaneously in multiple locations around the world. In the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, people began cultivating wheat and barley and domesticating sheep and goats. In China, they developed rice agriculture and pig domestication. In Mesoamerica, they cultivated corn, beans, and squash. In the Andes, they domesticated potatoes and llamas. In New Guinea, they developed banana cultivation and pig husbandry. These agricultural systems were quite different from each other, adapted to local conditions and involving different plants and animals. Yet they all emerged within a relatively short period, suggesting either remarkable coincidence or some underlying factor that made agriculture more likely to develop at that particular time. The conventional explanation focuses on climate change. The end of the last ice age brought more stable, warmer conditions that made agriculture more feasible in many regions. As wild food sources became more predictable and abundant, human populations could settle in permanent locations and begin experimenting with cultivation. But this explanation doesn't fully account for the speed and geographic spread of agricultural development. If the innovation was entirely independent in each region, we might expect it to appear at different times as local conditions became favorable. The relative synchronicity suggests either rapid communication between distant groups or the rediscovery of techniques that had been known before. Archaeological evidence hints that some agricultural knowledge might indeed be much older than generally assumed. In several locations, researchers have found evidence of plant cultivation or forest management dating back much further than the supposed beginning of agriculture. These findings are often controversial and difficult to interpret, but they raise the possibility that agricultural techniques were developed, lost, and redeveloped multiple times. If a global reset had occurred at the end of the Ice Age, perhaps triggered by climate change, flooding, or some other catastrophe, it might have destroyed agricultural societies that had developed during more stable periods. The survivors would have reverted to hunting and gathering, but they might have retained cultural memories of cultivation techniques that could be reapplied when conditions became favorable again. The rapid spread of agriculture across the world might therefore represent not original innovation, but recovery, the reactivation of knowledge that had been preserved in oral traditions, encoded in myths, or maintained by small groups of survivors who remembered the old ways. This same pattern appears in the development of urban civilization. Within just a few thousand years of the agricultural revolution, Complex cities began appearing in several parts of the world: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China. These urban centers seemed to emerge suddenly, with sophisticated architecture, complex social hierarchies, advanced crafts, and writing systems appearing in the archaeological record without clear predecessors. The speed of this urban revolution has always puzzled historians. Complex societies require not just technological knowledge, but also intricate social and political institutions. Legal systems, religious hierarchies, economic specialization, and governmental structures all need time to develop and stabilize. Yet archaeological evidence suggests that these elements appeared together rapidly, as if early cities were built according to plans that already existed, rather than being developed gradually through trial and error. If urban civilization had existed before and been destroyed in a reset, the survivors might have retained institutional memories of how complex societies function. When conditions became favorable for urban development again, these memories could have guided rapid reconstruction, allowing new cities to achieve sophistication much more quickly than would be possible starting from complete ignorance. The myths and legends of early urban civilizations often support this interpretation. Many cultures preserve stories of earlier ages when great cities existed, when knowledge was more advanced, when civilization reached heights that were later lost. These stories might not be mere imagination but cultural memories of actual earlier achievements, preserved through the dark periods between cycles, and reactivated when rebuilding became possible. The pattern of sudden leaps followed by gradual development appears throughout human history, from the Bronze Age to the Renaissance to the Industrial Revolution. Each represents a period when human capabilities seem to advance rapidly, building on foundations that don't always have clear historical precedents. If Earth has indeed experienced multiple resets, these leaps might represent not just innovation but recovery, the rediscovery of knowledge and techniques that had been achieved before, but lost in the chaos of civilizational collapse. Each apparent beginning might actually be a restoration, each revolution a renaissance in the truest sense of the word. This perspective changes how we understand human potential and human history. Instead of seeing ourselves as the first to achieve our current level of sophistication, we might be part of a recurring cycle, the latest expression of capabilities that our species has developed and lost and redeveloped many times over the course of its long existence. The sudden leaps in human achievement might therefore be evidence not of unique breakthroughs, but of hidden connections, threads of knowledge and memory that link us to earlier ages, allowing each new cycle to build more rapidly on the scattered foundations of what came before. Maps of impossible knowledge among the many mysteries that challenge our understanding of ancient history. Few are as intriguing as the medieval and Renaissance maps that seem to contain knowledge of places and features that should have been unknown to their creators. These cartographic enigmas suggest that geographical information of remarkable accuracy was available to mapmakers centuries before the official exploration and discovery of remote regions. The implications are profound. If these maps are genuine and accurate, they point to the existence of earlier seafaring civilizations with global reach, sophisticated navigation techniques, and detailed knowledge of the world's coastlines. Such civilizations would have had to exist and flourish, then somehow vanish so completely that only scattered fragments of their achievements survive to be copied by later mapmakers, who may not have fully understood what they were preserving. The most famous and controversial of these cartographic mysteries is the Piri-Reis map of 1513, created by the Ottoman Admiral Piri ibn Haji, maimed. This map displays portions of the Atlantic Ocean with remarkable accuracy, showing the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and South America with detail that was supposedly impossible for its time. But the most puzzling feature of the Peary Rise map is its depiction of a southern landmass that appears to correspond to Antarctica. Not only does the map show what looks like the Antarctic coastline, but it shows it without the massive ice sheet that has covered the continent for thousands of years. The coastline depicted matches closely with modern reconstructions of what Antarctica would look like if all the ice were removed, a piece of information that should have been completely unknown in 1513. The problem with this interpretation becomes clear when we consider the official timeline of Antarctic exploration. The continent was not even sighted by European explorers until 1820, more than 3 centuries after Peary Rise drew his map. It was not mapped with any accuracy until the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The true shape of the continental landmass beneath the ice was not determined until the International Geophysical Year of 1957–1958, when systematic surveys using modern technology finally revealed the hidden topography. How could a 16th-century Ottoman admiral have possessed such information? Peary Rise himself provides a clue in the marginal notes on his map, where he explains that he compiled his chart from many sources, including maps captured from Spanish explorers, Portuguese charts, an old Indian map, and what he describes as a map drawn by Christopher Columbus himself. More intriguingly, Peary Rise mentions that some of his sources were very ancient, dating back to the time of Alexander the Great or earlier. If this is true, it suggests that accurate geographical knowledge of Antarctica existed in the ancient world, was preserved through classical antiquity and the medieval period, and eventually found its way into the hands of early modern mapmakers. The Peary Rise map is not unique. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531, created by a French cartographer, also shows Antarctica as a continent-sized landmass free of ice. The map includes what appear to be rivers, mountain ranges, and coastal features that correspond remarkably well with the actual topography hidden beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Even more detailed is the Buech map of 1737, created by the French geographer Philippe Buech. This map shows Antarctica divided into 2 separate landmasses, connected by a narrow land bridge. Modern surveys have confirmed that without its ice cover, Antarctica would indeed appear as 2 large islands connected by a relatively small strip of land, exactly as Buech depicted it. The accuracy of these details is particularly striking because they show features that would have been invisible even to someone who somehow managed to reach Antarctica before the modern era. The continent has been covered by ice for at least 6,000 years, possibly much longer. To accurately map its true coastline and internal topography would require either advanced technology capable of seeing through ice or access to information gathered during a period when the continent was ice-free. Similar mysteries appear in maps of other regions. Some ancient and medieval charts show the coastlines of South America with remarkable accuracy, including rivers and mountain ranges that were supposedly unknown to European cartographers until much later periods of exploration. The accuracy extends to features that would have been difficult or impossible to determine even with extensive coastal exploration: internal river systems, mountain passes, and the true shapes of land masses that can only be determined through comprehensive geographical surveys. One possible explanation for these cartographic anomalies is that they represent the survival of geographical knowledge from a much earlier period, when sea levels were lower and coastlines were different from what they are today. During the last ice age, vast amounts of water were locked up in continental glaciers, causing sea levels to drop by several hundred feet. This exposed large areas of land that are now underwater and revealed coastlines that are now hidden beneath the waves. If advanced seafaring civilizations existed during this earlier period, they could have mapped the world as it existed then with different coastlines, exposed land bridges, and ice-free polar regions. When the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose, these civilizations might have been destroyed or severely disrupted by the dramatic changes in geography and climate. But fragments of their geographical knowledge could have survived, preserved in charts and maps that were copied and recopied over thousands of years. Each generation of mapmakers might have added their own observations and corrections, but the underlying geographical information would retain traces of the original surveys conducted when the world was very different. This scenario would explain not only the impossible accuracy of certain ancient maps, but also why they sometimes show features that no longer exist or coastlines that don't match modern geography. They might be faithful copies of surveys conducted when Antarctica was ice-free, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, and when land bridges connected continents that are now separated by deep water. The preservation of such ancient knowledge through thousands of years would be remarkable, but not impossible. Maps and charts are practical tools with real economic value, making them likely to be carefully preserved and copied. Maritime cultures would have strong incentives to maintain accurate geographical information, even if they didn't understand the origins of all their charts. Trade routes, navigation techniques, and geographical knowledge could be passed down through generations of sailors and merchants, preserved in guild traditions or royal archives. When civilizations collapsed or disappeared, their maps might be among the few artifacts valuable enough to be preserved by survivors or conquerors. The existence of anomalously accurate ancient maps doesn't prove the existence of lost civilizations, but it raises difficult questions about the sources of geographical knowledge in the pre-modern world. If such maps are genuine and accurate, they suggest that human exploration and mapping of the world began much earlier than conventionally believed, and that knowledge of global geography was far more advanced in ancient times than our current understanding allows. These cartographic mysteries might be among the clearest evidence we have for the existence of earlier cycles of civilization concrete artifacts that preserve traces of knowledge and capabilities that don't fit comfortably within the accepted timeline of human development. They hint at a time when the world was different, when other civilizations sailed unknown seas and mapped continents that would later be forgotten, leaving only scattered traces in the charts of later ages. Whether these maps represent recovered fragments of lost knowledge or simply remarkable coincidences and misinterpretations, they serve as reminders that our understanding of ancient capabilities might be incomplete. They suggest that the history of human exploration, navigation, and geographical knowledge might extend much further back in time than we currently recognize, and that the answers to some of our greatest historical mysteries might lie not in what we have discovered, but in what we have overlooked or misunderstood in the archives of the past. Beneath the waves, if there is one place where evidence of lost civilizations might be hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently for discovery, it is beneath the vast expanses of the world's oceans. The sea has always been both highway and boundary for human civilization, offering opportunities for trade and exploration, while also presenting dangers and obstacles that have shaped the course of history. But the sea is also a great concealer, capable of swallowing entire landscapes and preserving them in watery darkness for thousands of years. At the end of the last ice age, as massive glaciers melted and returned their frozen water to the oceans, sea levels rose dramatically by more than 400 feet in some regions. Vast areas of coastal land that had been exposed and habitable for thousands of years disappeared beneath the waves, taking with them whatever human settlements, monuments, and artifacts they may have contained. Today, Nearly all of humanity's great cities and most populous regions are located along coastlines, taking advantage of the sea's opportunities for trade, transportation, and resources. If ancient civilizations followed similar patterns, and there is every reason to believe they would have, then many of their most important settlements would now lie underwater, hidden from conventional archaeological investigation. This is not merely theoretical speculation. In recent decades, underwater archaeologists and marine explorers have discovered numerous submerged sites that appear to be the remains of human settlements, some of them far older and more sophisticated than mainstream archaeology had thought possible. One of the most striking and controversial of these discoveries lies off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni. Here, at depths of up to 100 feet below the surface, divers have found what appears to be a massive complex of stone structures that strongly suggest human construction. The Yonaguni Monument, as it has come to be known, features flat-topped pyramidal structures, terraced platforms, wide staircases, and what appear to be roads and ceremonial areas. The structures show remarkably straight edges, precise right angles, and careful geometric proportions that are difficult to explain as purely natural formations. While some geologists argue that the features could have been created by natural processes of rock fracturing and erosion, others contend that the regularity and organization of the structures strongly suggest human planning and construction. If the Yonaguni Monument is indeed artificial, its implications for human history are profound. The area where the structures lie was above sea level during the last ice age, but it was submerged when sea levels rose between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago. This would place the construction of the monument in a period long before conventional archaeology recognizes the existence of monumental architecture anywhere in the world. The builders would have had to possess sophisticated stone-working techniques, engineering knowledge, and social organization capable of coordinating large-scale construction projects. They would have had to quarry, transport, and precisely place massive blocks of stone according to a carefully planned design. Such capabilities are not supposed to have existed anywhere on Earth until several thousand years later, yet the evidence lies on the ocean floor, challenging our assumptions about ancient human achievement. Similar underwater mysteries have been discovered in other parts of the world. In the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India, marine archaeologists have used sonar scanning to identify what appear to be the ruins of extensive urban settlements now lying beneath more than 100 feet of water. The sonar images reveal what look like geometric patterns, straight lines, and regular structures that suggest planned urban development on a substantial scale. Diving expeditions to the site have recovered artifacts, including pottery fragments, beads, and tools that some researchers believe could be several thousand years old, potentially predating known Indian civilizations by millennia. Carbon dating of some organic materials found at the site has yielded controversial dates that push the timeline of Indian urban development far back into prehistory. The discoveries are not limited to Asia. In the Mediterranean Sea, underwater archaeologists have found numerous submerged settlements that offer glimpses into how quickly coastal civilizations can be lost to rising waters. Off the coast of Greece, the ancient city of Pavloptri lies just a few meters below the surface, its streets, buildings, and courtyards remarkably well preserved by the sea. Pavloptri dates to around 5,000 years ago, making it one of the world's oldest known submerged cities. The site includes residential areas, public buildings, and what appears to be a sophisticated water management system. Most remarkably, the urban layout shows clear signs of planning, with streets arranged in regular patterns and buildings constructed according to consistent architectural principles. While Pavloptri is officially recognized by archaeologists, Its existence serves as a powerful reminder of how easily coastal settlements can be lost when sea levels change. If a relatively recent site like Pavloptre can be so completely submerged that it was only rediscovered in the 1960s, how many older sites might lie in deeper waters, beyond the reach of casual exploration? The Mediterranean holds many such secrets. Near the coast of Egypt, underwater expeditions have located the remains of ancient Alexandria's royal quarter, including parts of the legendary lighthouse and palace complexes that once ranked among the wonders of the ancient world. These discoveries, while from historical periods, demonstrate how even the most magnificent achievements of human civilization can vanish beneath the waves. In the Caribbean, legends speak of entire islands and cities that were swallowed by the sea during times of catastrophe. While many of these stories are dismissed as folklore, the discovery of underwater formations near Bimini in the Bahamas has sparked decades of debate. The Bimini Road, as it has become known, consists of large, rectangular stones arranged in what appears to be a linear pattern on the ocean floor. Some researchers argue that these stones are simply natural limestone formations that have been shaped by geological processes. Others contend that their regular arrangement and apparent modification suggest human construction. The debate continues, but the site serves as another example of how the ocean floor might conceal evidence of human activity from much earlier periods. Perhaps the most famous legendary underwater city is Atlantis itself, described by Plato as an advanced island civilization that disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean in a single day and night of catastrophe. While most scholars consider Atlantis to be a philosophical allegory rather than a historical account, the persistence of similar stories across cultures suggests that memories of sunken lands may be more widespread than generally recognized. The Indian subcontinent preserves particularly detailed traditions of submerged cities. The ancient city of Dwarka, mentioned in Hindu scriptures as the magnificent capital built by Krishna, is said to have been swallowed by the sea after the god's departure from the earthly realm. Modern underwater investigations near the traditional site of Dwarka have indeed revealed submerged structures, though their age and origin remain subjects of scholarly debate. These discoveries take on added significance when we consider the sheer scale of land that was submerged when the last ice age ended. Continental shelves that are now under hundreds of feet of water were once fertile coastal plains that would have been ideal for human settlement. River valleys that are now underwater were once lush corridors that could have supported substantial populations. The Doggerland region, which once connected Britain to continental Europe, was a vast lowland area that supported diverse ecosystems and, presumably, human populations for thousands of years. When sea levels rose, this entire landscape and area roughly the size of England disappeared beneath the North Sea. Fishing boats occasionally dredge up mammoth bones, stone tools, and other artifacts from what was once dry land, offering tantalizing glimpses of the lost world beneath the waves. Similar, submerged landscapes exist around every continent. The continental shelves off the coasts of North and South America, Asia, Africa, and Australia all represent vast areas of former dry land that could have supported human civilizations during the Ice Age. If complex societies did develop in these regions, their remains would now lie under hundreds of feet of water and thousands of years of marine sediment. The preservation potential of underwater sites is both a blessing and a curse for archaeology. On one hand, the sea can preserve organic materials and artifacts that would have long since decayed on land. Shipwrecks from antiquity have yielded remarkably well-preserved wood, leather, and even textiles that provide detailed insights into ancient technologies and trade networks. On the other hand, underwater sites are extremely difficult and expensive to investigate. Most of the world's continental shelves remain completely unexplored by archaeologists. The technology for deep-water archaeology has only recently developed to the point where systematic surveys are possible, and even then, only a tiny fraction of potentially significant areas have been examined. The challenges are not merely technical, but also conceptual. Underwater archaeology has traditionally focused on shipwrecks and known historical sites, rather than searching for evidence of prehistoric civilizations. The methods and theoretical frameworks of the discipline have been shaped by the assumption that significant underwater sites would be relatively recent and already known from historical sources. If much older sites exist, settlements that were submerged at the end of the Ice Age and have remained hidden for 10,000 years or more, they might require entirely different approaches to locate and investigate. They would likely be buried under thick layers of marine sediment, making them invisible to conventional survey techniques. Their artifacts and structures might be so transformed by thousands of years of underwater exposure that they would be difficult to recognize as human-made. The mystery of underwater ruins extends beyond individual sites to encompass broader questions about the relationship between human civilization and global environmental change. If the end of the Ice Age did indeed destroy coastal civilizations by submerging their territories, it represents one of the largest catastrophic events in human history, a global reset that would have forced survivors to relocate, rebuild, and start over in entirely new environments. Such an event would explain many puzzling aspects of early post-glacial history: the apparent sudden emergence of agriculture in multiple locations, the rapid development of seafaring and navigation technologies, and the persistence of flood myths in cultures around the world. The survivors of submerged coastal civilizations would have had strong incentives to develop new ways of obtaining food, new methods of traveling across the transformed landscape, and new cultural mechanisms for preserving the memory of their losses. The ocean floor may thus hold not only archaeological evidence, but also the key to understanding the cyclical nature of human civilization itself. If advanced societies did rise and fall with the changing sea levels, if knowledge and technology were repeatedly developed, lost, and rediscovered as coastal populations were forced to adapt to new conditions, then the pattern of human history might be far more complex and repetitive than we currently recognize. The underwater ruins that have been discovered so far may represent only the tip of a very large iceberg. Beneath the world's oceans may lie the remains of entire civilizations, their cities and monuments preserved in the dark depths, waiting for future technologies and new ways of thinking to reveal their secrets. These hidden landscapes of the past might hold answers to some of humanity's oldest questions about our origins, our capabilities, and our relationship with the ever-changing Earth that we call home. In this vast underwater archive, the silence of the deep ocean might be not emptiness, but preservation, a realm where the memory of lost worlds rests undisturbed, protected from the erosive forces that have claimed their terrestrial counterparts, maintaining a record of human achievement that extends far beyond the reach of conventional archaeology and far deeper into the past than our current timelines allow. The Ice Ages, as great erasers, the Ice Ages represent some of the most dramatic environmental changes in Earth's recent history, transforming entire continents and fundamentally altering the conditions for life across vast regions of the planet. While we often think of these glacial periods as natural phenomena, slow cycles of cooling and warming driven by astronomical factors, they can also be understood as enormous erasers forces, capable of wiping clean any trace of human civilization that might have existed in their path. Each ice age brought transformations so profound that they would challenge the survival of even the most advanced societies. Imagine vast sheets of ice, sometimes more than a mile thick, advancing slowly but inexorably across continents, grinding down mountains, carving new valleys, and burying everything in their path under billions of tons of frozen water. The weight alone would be enough to crush any human structure, but the ice also acted as a massive bulldozer, scraping the landscape clean and redistributing its contents across thousands of miles. The last ice age, which ended only about 12,000 years ago, provides a clear example of the scale of these changes. At its peak, ice covered virtually all of Canada, most of the northern United States down to the latitude of New York City, and extended across northern Europe from Scandinavia to central Germany. In Asia, glaciers covered much of Siberia and the Himalayan regions. The southern hemisphere experienced its own glaciation, with ice sheets covering much of Patagonia and extending across the highlands of Tasmania and New Zealand. But the ice sheets themselves were only part of the story. The climate changes that accompanied glaciation were equally dramatic. Regions that remained ice-free often became much colder and drier than they are today. Forests retreated toward the equator or disappeared entirely. Deserts expanded as precipitation patterns shifted. The jet stream and ocean currents, which regulate global weather systems, followed entirely different paths, creating climatic conditions that would be barely recognizable today. For any complex human society existing during these periods, the challenges would have been overwhelming. Agriculture would have been impossible across vast regions where crops can flourish today. The carrying capacity of the land would have been dramatically reduced, forcing populations to concentrate in small refugia where conditions remain tolerable. Trade networks would have been disrupted, as familiar routes became impassable and resource distributions changed completely. Most critically, the ice ages did not arrive gradually enough for societies to adapt. While the overall cooling process occurred over thousands of years, the advance of ice sheets could be remarkably rapid in geological terms. Archaeological evidence suggests that glaciers sometimes advanced several miles per year, fast enough to overwhelm human settlements within a single generation. The end of ice ages could be even more catastrophic for human societies. When glaciers finally began to retreat, they released enormous volumes of meltwater that had been stored as ice for thousands of years. This water didn't flow gently back to the oceans. It often burst forth in catastrophic floods that dwarfed any natural disaster in recorded history. The draining of glacial Lake Missoula in North America provides an example of the scale of these floods. This ice-dammed lake, larger than Lake Erie and Lake Ontario combined, emptied repeatedly when ice dams failed, sending walls of water hundreds of feet high racing across what is now eastern Washington and Oregon. These floods carved the channeled scablands of the Columbia River Basin, creating a landscape so unusual that geologists initially refused to believe it could have been formed by water action. Similar megafloods occurred around the world as Ice Age ended. The draining of Lake Agassiz in central North America released so much fresh water into the North Atlantic that it may have disrupted ocean circulation patterns and triggered temporary climate reversals. In Europe, the sudden draining of glacial lakes carved new river valleys and reshaped coastlines. For human societies, these floods would have been civilization-ending events. Imagine entire river valleys, the most fertile and densely populated regions, being scoured clean by walls of water moving faster than a person could run and reaching heights that would overtop most hills. Any cities, monuments, or accumulated artifacts in the path of such floods would have been swept away completely, leaving no trace of their existence. The rising sea levels that accompanied deglaciation created another form of reset. As ice sheets melted, Ocean levels rose by more than 400 feet in some regions, submerging vast areas of coastal land that had been exposed and habitable during the Ice Age. These coastal plains represented some of the most desirable territory for human settlement, flat, fertile land with access to both marine and terrestrial resources. If advanced civilizations had developed along these ancient coastlines, their remains would now lie under hundreds of feet of water, far beyond the reach of conventional archaeological investigation. The rapidity of sea level rise in some periods means that entire regions could have been submerged within just a few human generations, forcing populations to migrate inland and abandon everything they had built. The transformative power of ice ages extends beyond immediate physical destruction to include long-term changes in human population and culture. Genetic studies suggest that human populations went through severe bottlenecks during glacial periods, with total numbers dropping to levels that threatened the survival of the species itself. These population crashes would have had profound effects on the preservation of cultural knowledge. Complex technologies, artistic traditions, and social institutions require substantial populations to maintain them. When human groups are reduced to small, scattered bands focused on immediate survival, much of their accumulated knowledge dies with the specialists who possessed it. Writing systems are forgotten when there are no longer scribes to maintain them. Engineering techniques are lost when there are no longer construction projects to apply them to. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge disappears when societies can no longer support the leisure time necessary for abstract thought. The survivors of glacial periods would necessarily have reverted to simpler, more portable technologies and social forms. Even if their ancestors had achieved remarkable sophistication, the descendants would appear in the archaeological record as simple hunter-gatherers, using basic stone tools and temporary shelters. The apparent gap between complex civilizations and simpler societies might reflect not different levels of human capability, but different environmental constraints. This pattern of simplification followed by renewed complexity appears repeatedly in the archaeological record, often coinciding with major climate transitions. The end of the last ice age, for example, is followed by the relatively rapid emergence of agriculture, permanent settlements, and eventually urban civilizations. This sequence might represent not the first development of these innovations, but their rediscovery by populations that were finally able to support complex societies again. The ice ages also help explain the uneven distribution of human cultural development across different regions. Areas that were heavily glaciated or experienced severe climate stress during ice ages might have lost more of their cultural heritage than regions that remained relatively stable. This could account for why certain areas seem to have sudden cultural flowerings, while others show more gradual development. The difference might reflect varying degrees of reset and recovery, rather than different levels of human potential. Archaeological evidence from Ice Age refugia, small areas that remained habitable during glacial maxima, sometimes reveals surprisingly sophisticated cultural developments. Cave art in southern Europe, for example, reaches remarkable levels of artistic achievement during periods when much of the continent was covered by ice. These refugia might represent not just biological survival centers, but also repositories of cultural knowledge that was preserved through the worst periods, and then spread outward as conditions improved. The cyclic nature of ice ages means that this process of cultural destruction and preservation has repeated many times throughout human history. Each glacial period would have reset human civilization to varying degrees, depending on its severity and the regions affected. Each interglacial period would have provided an opportunity for cultural recovery and new development, building on whatever knowledge had survived from previous cycles. If this interpretation is correct, then the ice ages represent not just geological phenomena, but cultural resets on a global scale. They remind us that human civilization, no matter how sophisticated, remains vulnerable to environmental changes that operate on timescales longer than individual human memory. They suggest that much of what we consider to be the first development of various technologies and social forms might actually represent recovery and rediscovery of capabilities that had been achieved before, but lost to the grinding action of ice and time. The great ice sheets have retreated for now, but they have not disappeared forever. Climate scientists recognize that ice ages are likely to return in the future, as they have throughout Earth's history. When they do, they will once again test humanity's ability to preserve its achievements through periods of environmental upheaval. The question is not whether such challenges will come again, but whether we will be better prepared than our ancestors to maintain continuity through the next great reset. Megalithic mysteries scattered across the world's continents stand monuments that continue to challenge our understanding of ancient human capabilities. These megalithic structures, built from stones so massive that moving them would be difficult even with modern machinery, represent achievements that seem inconsistent with the simple technologies that conventional archaeology assigns to their builders. What makes these monuments particularly intriguing is not just their impressive scale, but the sophisticated knowledge they often contain. Many are precisely aligned with astronomical events, suggesting that their creators possessed detailed understanding of celestial mechanics. Others display mathematical principles and engineering techniques that indicate levels of knowledge far beyond what we might expect from societies using only stone tools and human labor. Stonehenge, perhaps the most famous of these ancient monuments, exemplifies the puzzle. Rising from the English countryside like a giant's temple, its massive trilithons, two vertical stones topped by a horizontal lintel, create a circular arrangement that has captured human imagination for centuries. But Stonehenge is far more than a simple circle of stones. The monument's alignment with astronomical events is remarkably precise. The heel stone marks the point where the sun rises on the summer solstice, while other stones align with the moon's complex 18.6-year cycle and various stellar positions. These alignments required not just careful observation, but sophisticated mathematical calculation to translate celestial movements into earthly architecture. The construction itself presents equally impressive challenges. The largest stones, called sarsens, weigh up to 50 tons each and were transported from quarries more than 20 miles away. The smaller bluestones, weighing several tons each, were brought from Wales a distance of over 150 miles across difficult terrain that included rivers, hills, and marshlands. Even more remarkable is the precision with which these stones were shaped and positioned. The horizontal lintels were curved to follow the circular plan of the monument and were secured to the uprights using sophisticated joinery techniques borrowed from woodworking. The entire structure demonstrates a level of planning, engineering, and mathematical knowledge that speaks to minds capable of complex abstract thinking. Yet Stonehenge was built over 4,000 years ago, during what archaeologists call the Neolithic period, when people were supposedly just learning to farm and live in permanent settlements. According to conventional timelines, these builders had no written language, no metal tools, and no wheels. How did they conceive, plan, and execute such a sophisticated project? The mysteries deepen when we consider Pumapunku, high in the Bolivian Andes near Lake Titicaca. Here, at an altitude of over 12,000 feet, ancient builders created what may be the most precisely cut stone structures anywhere in the world. The site consists of massive blocks of andesite and red sandstone, some weighing more than 100 tons, that have been shaped with extraordinary accuracy. The precision of the stonework at Pumapunku defies easy explanation. Blocks fit together with tolerances measured in millimeters, creating joints so tight that not even a knife blade can be inserted between them. The surfaces are perfectly flat, the angles exactly 90 degrees, and the geometric forms so regular that they seem almost machine-made. Many of the stones feature complex three-dimensional shapes with multiple interlocking elements, like pieces of an enormous stone puzzle. Some blocks have been carved with intricate channel systems and perfectly circular holes that appear to have been drilled rather than chipped away. The level of precision suggests tools and techniques far more sophisticated than anything conventionally attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations. Carbon dating places Pumapunku's construction at around 1,500 years ago, during a period when the builders supposedly had only bronze and stone tools at their disposal. Yet the precision of the work rivals that of modern machine shops, and some researchers argue that certain features could only have been created with diamond-tipped tools or advanced cutting techniques. The transportation challenges at Pumapunku are equally puzzling. The nearest quarry for the red sandstone blocks is over 10 miles away, requiring the massive stones to be moved across difficult mountain terrain. The andesite quarry is even more distant, and some of the blocks would have had to be transported across Lake Titicaca itself. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe presents perhaps the most profound challenge to conventional archaeological timelines. This massive site consists of circular enclosures defined by enormous T-shaped pillars, some reaching heights of 18 feet and weighing up to 16 tons. The pillars are decorated with intricate carvings of animals: lions, bulls, foxes, cranes, and serpents, rendered with remarkable artistic skill. What makes Göbekli Tepe particularly significant is its age. Carbon dating places the site's construction at around 11,600 years ago, making it one of the oldest known monumental structures in the world. This predates the supposed beginning of agriculture by thousands of years, and challenges fundamental assumptions about the development of human civilization. According to conventional archaeology, the people who built Göbekli Tepe should have been nomadic hunter-gatherers living in small, mobile bands. They should not have had the social organization necessary to coordinate large construction projects, the agricultural surplus to support specialized workers, or the motivation to create permanent monumental architecture. Yet the evidence at Göbekli Tepe tells a different story. The site required quarrying, transporting, and precisely positioning hundreds of massive stones. The T-shaped pillars had to be carved with sophisticated techniques and decorated with complex artistic programs. The entire project implies a level of social organization, technical knowledge, and cultural sophistication that doesn't fit the standard narrative of human development. The pillars themselves suggest knowledge that extends beyond basic construction techniques. Many are aligned with specific stellar positions, indicating astronomical observations of remarkable precision. The animal carvings may represent a sophisticated symbolic system, possibly encoding information about seasonal cycles, mythological traditions, or astronomical phenomena. Even the site's location seems to have been chosen with careful consideration. Göbekli Tepe sits atop a hill that commands views across a vast landscape, and recent archaeological surveys have revealed that it is part of a much larger complex of similar sites scattered across the region. This suggests a cultural tradition of monumental construction that extended across considerable geographic areas and persisted for centuries or millennia. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza continues to generate questions about ancient engineering capabilities. Beyond its sheer scale, originally standing 481 feet tall and containing over 2 million stone blocks, the pyramid demonstrates levels of precision that challenge conventional explanations of ancient construction techniques. The pyramid's base forms an almost perfect square, with sides that differ in length by only a few centimeters across a distance of more than 750 feet. Its orientation to cardinal directions is accurate to within 3/60th of a degree. The ratios of its dimensions encode mathematical constants, including pi and the golden ratio, suggesting sophisticated understanding of advanced mathematics. The construction challenges are equally impressive. The limestone blocks, weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons each, were quarried with precision, transported from distant sites, and positioned with accuracy that modern construction crews would find difficult to match. The internal chambers and passages are aligned with specific stellar positions and contain acoustic properties that suggest understanding of sound propagation and resonance. Recent surveys using cosmic ray imaging have revealed that the pyramid contains previously unknown internal chambers, suggesting that our understanding of its structure and purpose remains incomplete. The monument may conceal knowledge and techniques that we have not yet learned to recognize or decode. These megalithic sites share common features that suggest underlying principles or traditions that span different cultures and time periods. Many demonstrate astronomical alignments that required sophisticated observation and calculation. Most display construction techniques that seem inconsistent with the simple technologies attributed to their builders. All required social organization and project management capabilities that challenge assumptions about ancient society. Perhaps most significantly, these monuments seem designed not just to serve immediate practical purposes, but to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations. Their massive construction ensures long-term survival, while their astronomical alignments and mathematical proportions encode information that remains accessible to anyone with the knowledge to read it. If Earth has indeed experienced cycles of civilizational rise and fall, these megalithic monuments might represent attempts by earlier societies to preserve their most important knowledge through periods of reset and cultural collapse. Built with stone rather than more perishable materials, aligned with permanent celestial markers rather than temporary cultural references, they could serve as libraries for civilizations that knew their achievements might otherwise be lost. The precision and sophistication of these ancient monuments suggest that human capabilities in remote time periods were far greater than conventionally recognized. They hint at traditions of knowledge and technique that developed over long periods, reached remarkable heights, and then were somehow interrupted or forgotten before being partially recovered in later ages. Whether these structures represent the achievements of lost civilizations or simply demonstrate the underestimated capabilities of known ancient cultures, they stand as silent testimony to human potential that transcends the simple narratives of linear progress. They remind us that the past may hold surprises that challenge our assumptions about when and how human societies first achieved monumental expression of their highest aspirations and deepest knowledge. The long road back if civilizations were indeed destroyed in past resets, the people who remained would have faced a journey back to complexity that could span many generations. A reset does not necessarily mean the complete extinction of humanity, but it does mean that most of what people once knew, their accumulated wisdom, their sophisticated technologies, their complex social structures, would be lost in the chaos of survival. Picture the aftermath of a great catastrophe that has swept away cities, disrupted trade networks, and scattered populations across a transformed landscape. The survivors would find themselves in a world suddenly hostile to the complexity they had known. Without the infrastructure that supported specialization, without the institutions that preserved knowledge, without the surplus that allowed some people to pursue activities beyond immediate subsistence, even the most advanced society would be forced to simplify. In such conditions, the skills most likely to survive would be those tied directly to staying alive. Finding food, making shelter, starting fires, treating injuries, and maintaining basic tools. The knowledge that would be first to disappear would be that which seemed most abstract or specialized: mathematics, astronomy, engineering principles, artistic techniques, written languages, and the intricate details of crafts that required years of apprenticeship to master. Imagine a group of survivors from our own civilization, scattered by some global catastrophe and stripped of their technological support systems. Even if some of them had been engineers, scientists, or artists in the previous world, their immediate priority would be securing food, water, and shelter. They might remember how to build computers or perform surgery, but without the industrial base to provide materials and tools, such knowledge would be useless for practical survival. Within a generation or two, much of this specialized knowledge would be lost entirely. Children growing up in the aftermath would learn the skills their parents found most essential for survival, but they would not inherit the complex cultural traditions that had taken centuries to develop. The subtle techniques of metallurgy, the mathematical principles underlying architecture, the observational methods of astronomy, all would disappear as attention focused on more immediate needs. This process of cultural simplification explains why archaeological evidence of recovery periods often shows what appears to be a sudden leap from simple to complex societies. The survivors and their descendants would retain human intelligence and creativity, but they would need time to rebuild the social and material foundations that complex culture requires. The first priority would be establishing stable communities large enough to support some degree of specialization. Hunter-gatherer groups, no matter how skilled, cannot maintain the kind of detailed knowledge that requires full-time practitioners. Only when populations grew large enough to free some individuals from food production could societies begin to support specialists in crafts, arts, or learning. This population threshold explains why the development of agriculture was such a crucial step in civilizational recovery. By allowing people to produce food surpluses and settle in permanent locations, farming created the conditions necessary for knowledge to accumulate and be passed down through generations. Specialists could emerge: potters, metalworkers, builders, priests, each developing expertise in their particular domain. But even with agriculture established, the road back to true complexity would be long and uncertain. Complex knowledge often builds on other complex knowledge in ways that are not immediately obvious. Mathematics requires not just practical counting, but abstract reasoning about relationships and principles. Architecture depends not just on knowing how to stack stones, but on understanding forces, materials, and design principles. Astronomy needs not just the ability to observe the sky, but sophisticated methods for recording, calculating, and predicting celestial movements. Each generation might rediscover some of what had been lost, but they might also develop new approaches that differed from those of their predecessors. The knowledge that emerged from recovery periods might therefore be both familiar and different, recognizably human in its achievements, but distinct in its specific forms and expressions. We can see hints of this process in the myths and traditions preserved by ancient cultures. Many societies tell stories of earlier golden ages, when people possessed greater wisdom and power than the present generation. In some traditions, this knowledge was lost through human failings, pride, conflict, or moral decay. In others, it was taken away by gods or destroyed by natural catastrophes. These stories might preserve cultural memories of actual periods when knowledge was more advanced, followed by times of loss and gradual recovery. The details would naturally become mythologized over centuries of retelling, but the underlying pattern might reflect real experiences of civilizational decline and renewal. The Hindu concept of yugas, or great ages, describes this process explicitly. According to these traditions, time moves in cycles, with each age characterized by different levels of knowledge, virtue, and human capability. The earliest age, the Satya Yuga, is described as a time of perfect knowledge and harmony. Subsequent ages show progressive decline until the final age, the Kali Yuga, when knowledge is fragmented and truth is difficult to discern. But this decline is not permanent. After the darkest age comes a new Satya Yuga, and the cycle begins again. This pattern might reflect not just religious imagination but cultural memory of actual cycles of civilizational rise and fall, preserved in mythological form to survive the periods of cultural disruption. The process of recovery would not be uniform across all regions or all domains of knowledge. Some types of information might be preserved more easily than others. Practical techniques that could be directly applied to survival needs might be maintained even through difficult periods, while more abstract knowledge might be lost and need to be completely redeveloped. Geography would also play a role. Regions that experienced less severe disruption during resets might maintain more of their cultural heritage, becoming centers from which knowledge could spread outward as conditions improved. Areas that were heavily damaged might lag behind in recovery, creating the uneven patterns of development that we see in the archaeological record. The recovery process might also be accelerated by the rediscovery of artifacts or monuments left by earlier civilizations. A partially preserved building might provide clues about architectural techniques. An ancient tool might suggest metallurgical processes. Astronomical alignments in old monuments might inspire renewed interest in celestial observation. This could explain why some ancient achievements seem to appear suddenly in the archaeological record, with little evidence of gradual development. Rather than being invented from scratch, they might represent the rediscovery and adaptation of techniques that had been developed before, but lost during periods of reset. The resilience shown by humanity throughout history suggests that this process of recovery, no matter how difficult, would be repeated as many times as necessary. Each reset would test human adaptability, but each recovery would demonstrate the species' fundamental drive toward complexity, knowledge, and achievement. If Earth has been reset multiple times, then we ourselves might be the products of just such a recovery process, the latest in a long series of attempts to rebuild civilization from the fragments left by earlier cycles. Our achievements might echo those of our predecessors in ways we don't recognize, and our struggles might mirror challenges faced by countless generations who walked the same long road back from simplicity to complexity. The journey would be measured not in years but in millennia, not in individual lives but in the accumulated efforts of entire lineages working to recover what had been lost, and perhaps to surpass it. Each generation would add its own contributions to the rebuilding process, creating a civilizational momentum that could eventually restore and exceed the achievements of earlier ages. In this view, human civilization is not a linear progression from primitive to advanced, but a cyclical process of development, loss, and recovery that has repeated many times throughout our species' history. We stand not at the end of this process, but within it, neither the first to reach our current level of achievement nor likely to be the last, but part of an ongoing cycle that connects us to both past and future expressions of human potential. Atlantis and the archetypal lost world among the many myths that speak of vanished civilizations. None has captured the human imagination more powerfully than Atlantis. First described by the Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, Atlantis represents the archetypal lost world, a great civilization that achieved remarkable heights only to disappear suddenly and completely, leaving behind only stories and questions. Plato's account places Atlantis on a large island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. According to his narrative, this island civilization was larger than Libya and Asia combined, and it commanded a powerful empire that stretched across the Mediterranean and Atlantic. The Atlanteans were described as skilled engineers who built magnificent cities with elaborate harbors, bridges, and temples. They possessed advanced metallurgy, including a mysterious metal called orichalcum that was said to be more precious than gold. The capital city of Atlantis, as Plato described it, was a marvel of urban planning and engineering. It consisted of alternating rings of land and water, connected by tunnels that allowed ships to sail from the outer ocean to the city's heart. The central island contained a great temple dedicated to Poseidon, decorated with gold, silver, and ivory, and surrounded by gardens, gymnasiums, and other public buildings. But despite their technological achievements and material prosperity, the Atlanteans eventually fell into moral decay. They became aggressive and imperialistic, attempting to conquer other lands including ancient Athens. As punishment for their hubris, the gods sent earthquakes and floods that destroyed their entire civilization in a single day and night, swallowing the island beneath the sea so completely that it left only an impassable muddy shoal. For centuries, scholars have debated whether Plato intended Atlantis as historical fact or philosophical allegory. Many argue that the story was a parable about the ideal state and the dangers of moral corruption, never meant to be taken as literal history. The details seem too neat, the moral lessons too clear, and the destruction too complete to represent actual events. Yet the story of Atlantis resonates with something deeper than philosophical abstraction. Its themes advanced civilization, moral decline, sudden destruction, complete disappearance appear in myths and legends from cultures around the world that had no contact with Plato or Greek philosophy. This suggests either that Plato tapped into universal human concerns about the fragility of civilization, or that his account preserved memories of actual events that had been recorded in multiple cultural traditions. The universality of lost civilization myths is striking when examined closely. In ancient Mesopotamia, texts describe the Anunnaki, beings who brought civilization to humanity but were eventually destroyed by floods sent by the gods. Hindu traditions speak of Dvaraka, the golden city of Krishna that was swallowed by the ocean after the gods' departure from the mortal world. Buddhist texts describe Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of advanced wisdom that disappeared from the ordinary world, but continues to exist in a realm beyond normal perception. In the Americas, the Maya preserved accounts of earlier ages of humanity that were destroyed by various catastrophes. The Aztecs believed they lived in the fifth sun, meaning that 4 previous worlds had been created and destroyed before the current age. Each destruction was total, requiring the gods to create entirely new forms of human life to populate the renewed world. Norse mythology describes Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, when the current world will be destroyed by fire and flood before being reborn in a new and perfect form. Celtic traditions tell of the otherworld, a realm of perfection that exists parallel to our own, but remains largely hidden from ordinary perception. What makes these stories particularly compelling is not just their widespread distribution, but their structural similarities. They describe not primitive societies being destroyed by natural disasters, but advanced civilizations falling due to a combination of external catastrophe and internal corruption. They speak of knowledge being lost, of golden ages giving way to darker times, of the need for humanity to begin again from simpler foundations. Modern discoveries have given new relevance to some of these ancient accounts. Underwater archaeology has revealed that many coastal areas were indeed submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age. Cities and settlements that once thrived along ancient shorelines now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water, exactly as the flood myths describe. The discovery of underwater ruins near Dwarka in India, for example, has lent credibility to the ancient Sanskrit texts that describe this city as a magnificent port that was eventually swallowed by the sea. While the ruins may not date to the mythological age of Krishna, they demonstrate that the basic premise of the story's great cities lost beneath the waves has a foundation in historical reality. Similarly, the recent recognition that the Mediterranean was once a much smaller body of water, with large areas of dry land where the sea now lies, suggests that some flood myths might preserve memories of actual geographical changes that would have been catastrophic for ancient populations. The eruption of Thura, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE, provides another possible historical basis for stories of sudden civilizational destruction. This massive volcanic explosion destroyed the island of Thura and generated tsunamis that devastated coastal areas throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The eruption also coincided with the mysterious collapse of the Minoan civilization on Crete, one of the most advanced societies of the Bronze Age. Some researchers have suggested that memories of the Thura eruption and the fall of the Minoans might have been preserved in Egyptian records and later transmitted to Plato, forming the historical kernel around which he constructed his Atlantis narrative. The Minoans had indeed been a sophisticated maritime civilization with advanced architecture, indoor plumbing, and extensive trade networks. Their sudden disappearance would have made a powerful impression on neighboring cultures. But whether or not Atlantis corresponds to any specific historical civilization, its significance lies in what it represents as a cultural archetype. The story embodies humanity's deep awareness that civilizations, no matter how advanced or powerful, remain vulnerable to forces beyond their control. It acknowledges that what seems permanent and unshakable can vanish with shocking suddenness. The Atlantis myth also serves as a warning about the relationship between technological capability and moral wisdom. In Plato's account, the Atlanteans possessed remarkable engineering skills and material wealth, but they lacked the moral restraint to use their power responsibly. Their destruction came not because they were weak or primitive, but because they had become arrogant and aggressive, believing themselves superior to natural and divine law. This theme resonates powerfully in our own age, when technological capabilities have reached levels that would seem magical to previous generations. But when questions about the wisdom and responsibility of such power remain as pressing as ever, the Atlantis story suggests that civilizational survival depends not just on technical achievement, but on the character and judgment of those who wield advanced capabilities. If Earth has indeed experienced cycles of civilizational rise and fall, then Atlantis might represent not a unique event, but a recurring pattern. Each cycle might produce societies that achieve remarkable technological sophistication, only to be destroyed by some combination of external catastrophe and internal failure. The specific details would vary: different technologies, different environmental challenges, different forms of social organization, but the underlying pattern might remain constant. In this interpretation, Atlantis becomes both history and prophecy, a reminder of what has happened before and a warning of what might happen again. The story suggests that human societies are capable of great achievements, but also prone to great failures, and that the line between golden age and catastrophic collapse might be thinner than we usually imagine. The persistence of Atlantis in human imagination also reflects our intuitive understanding that the past might be more complex and mysterious than conventional history allows. Even those who reject Plato's account as pure fiction often feel drawn to the possibility that earlier civilizations might have achieved things we have forgotten, known things we have yet to rediscover. This intuition might be more accurate than we realize. If resets have occurred multiple times throughout human history, then the archaeological record would be incomplete, filled with gaps where evidence of earlier achievements had been erased. The stories of lost civilizations might preserve fragments of cultural memory from periods that conventional archaeology has not yet learned to recognize or investigate. Whether Atlantis was real or imaginary, historical fact or philosophical parable, it serves a crucial function in human culture. It reminds us that civilizations are not permanent fixtures but temporary constructions, subject to the same cycles of growth and decay that govern all natural systems. It suggests that our current achievements, impressive as they may seem, represent just one moment in a much longer story that stretches both backward and forward through time. The archetypal power of Atlantis lies in its ability to make us question our assumptions about progress, permanence, and human destiny. It asks whether we are truly the first to reach our current level of advancement, or whether we might be following paths walked by others before us. It wonders whether our civilization will prove more durable than those that came before, or whether we too might someday become the subject of myths told by future generations who struggle to understand how we lived and why we disappeared. In the end, Atlantis represents more than a lost civilization. It embodies the eternal human recognition that all things pass away, that even the greatest achievements are temporary, and that the story of human civilization might be far more complex, cyclical, and mysterious than we usually dare to imagine. As we drift toward sleep, we might wonder what stories future archaeologists will tell about us, and whether our own age might someday seem as mysterious and legendary as Atlantis appears to us today. Cycles of fire, flood, and ice, when we examine the patterns of destruction described in myths and legends from around the world, and compare them with what we know from geological and archaeological evidence, a clear rhythm emerges. The world seems to move through recurring cycles of catastrophe and renewal, each type of disaster playing its role in the grand symphony of planetary change. These cycles operate on different timescales and through different mechanisms, but their effect is always the same: the old world ends, survivors adapt to new conditions, and eventually a new civilization emerges from the ruins of the last. Understanding these patterns helps us see how resets might work in practice, and why they would leave behind only fragments and mysteries for future generations to puzzle over. Fire appears as a constant theme in destruction myths, manifesting in several different forms. Sometimes it is described as fire from the sky, celestial flames that rain down upon the earth, burning forests and cities alike. These stories might preserve memories of asteroid or comet impacts, events that would appear to ancient observers as the sky itself catching fire. The Tunguska event of 1908 provides a small-scale example of how such an impact might appear to human witnesses. When a celestial body exploded in the atmosphere over Siberia, it created a fireball visible for hundreds of miles and flattened trees across an area larger than London. Local indigenous peoples describe the event as the sky opening up and fire pouring down from above. If a similar but larger impact had occurred in ancient times, it would have created exactly the kind of sky fire described in many myths. Volcanic eruptions provide another source of fire-based destruction. When Mount Vesuvius destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum in 79 CE, it buried the cities so completely that they were lost for over 1,500 years. The residents were killed instantly by superheated gas and ash, preserving them in the exact positions they occupied at the moment of death. The event was so sudden and complete that entire cities simply vanished from the historical record until their rediscovery in the 18th century. Even more dramatic are the supervolcanic eruptions that occur rarely but with devastating effect. The Toba eruption 74,000 years ago ejected so much ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that it caused a volcanic winter lasting several years. Global temperatures dropped dramatically, agriculture became impossible across vast regions, and human populations may have been reduced to just a few thousand individuals worldwide. Such events would appear to survivors as the world itself catching fire. The initial eruption would light up the sky with flames and glowing projectiles. Hot ash would rain down over thousands of square miles, igniting forests and buildings. The subsequent darkness and cold would seem like the end of the world itself, a fire that consumed not just the land but the very light of the sun. Flood stories are even more widespread in human mythology, appearing in virtually every culture that has left written records or oral traditions. These accounts describe waters rising to cover the highest mountains, destroying all but a few survivors who managed to escape in boats or by climbing to elevated refuges. The global pattern of sea level rise at the end of the last ice age provides a geological basis for these flood memories. As massive ice sheets melted, ocean levels rose by several hundred feet, submerging vast areas of coastal land that had been inhabited for thousands of years. The process was not gradual enough for easy adaptation. Geological evidence suggests that some of the ice sheet collapses occurred rapidly, causing sea levels to jump by tens of feet within just a few decades. For people living along the ancient coastlines, this would have been an unimaginable catastrophe. Entire regions where their ancestors had lived for countless generations would disappear beneath the waves. The fertile river valleys and coastal plains that supported the largest populations would be among the first areas submerged, forcing survivors to migrate inland to less favorable territories. The psychological impact of such changes would be profound. Landmarks that had defined the mental map of the world would vanish underwater. Sacred sites, burial grounds, and the accumulated infrastructure of generations would be lost forever. The survivors would be forced to remake not just their physical world, but their entire understanding of what was permanent and what was vulnerable to change. Beyond the slow flood of rising seas, there were also the catastrophic floods that occurred when ice dams failed and glacial lakes emptied in a matter of days or weeks. The draining of Lake Missoula in North America created floods that dwarfed any disaster in recorded history, with walls of water hundreds of feet high racing across landscapes at speeds faster than a horse could run. Such megafloods would have been devastating to any human populations in their path. The floods carved entirely new landscapes, stripping away thousands of years of accumulated soil and sediment and depositing it in new locations hundreds of miles away. Any settlements, artifacts, or human remains in the affected areas would have been scoured away completely, leaving no trace of their existence. Ice represents the third major form of cyclical destruction, operating on longer timescales but with equally transformative effects. The advance and retreat of continental ice sheets reshaped entire continents, burying some regions under miles of ice while dramatically altering the climate and ecology of others. During glacial maxima, vast areas that are now temperate and heavily populated were covered by ice sheets that ground slowly across the landscape like enormous bulldozers. The weight of the ice was so great that it depressed the underlying bedrock, while the glaciers carved new valleys, redirected rivers, and completely transformed regional topography. For human societies, ice ages would have been civilization-ending events in most affected regions. Agriculture would become impossible across vast areas, as growing seasons shortened and temperatures dropped below the threshold for crop survival. The carrying capacity of the land would decline dramatically, forcing populations to migrate toward the equator or face starvation. But ice ages also created opportunities. The locking up of water in continental glaciers caused sea levels to drop, exposing land bridges that connected continents and revealing coastal plains that could support large populations. During glacial periods, it was possible to walk from Asia to North America, from Britain to continental Europe, and between many islands that are now separated by deep water. If advanced civilizations developed during these glacial periods, they might have built their cities and monuments on land that is now underwater. When the ice melted and sea levels rose, these achievements would have been submerged along with the coastal plains that supported them, leaving only scattered high-elevation sites as evidence of their existence. The cyclical nature of these changes means that they have repeated many times throughout Earth's history. Each cycle of cooling and warming, each period of volcanic activity, each close encounter with celestial bodies capable of causing impacts, represents an opportunity for reset. The specific triggers might vary, but the effects would be similar: the disruption of established patterns, the destruction of accumulated achievements, and the need for survivors to begin again under changed conditions. What makes these cycles particularly significant is that they operate on timescales that exceed the span of human memory. A single ice age lasts tens of thousands of years, long enough for dozens of human generations to pass without personal memory of different conditions. The intervals between major volcanic eruptions or asteroid impacts are similarly long, creating false confidence that such events belong to the remote past rather than representing ongoing threats. This temporal disconnect means that each human civilization tends to develop as if current conditions were permanent, building their societies around the assumption that today's climate, geography, and resource availability will continue indefinitely. When change comes, as geological evidence shows it inevitably does, the resulting disruption is total precisely because it was unexpected and unplanned for. The myths of fire, flood, and ice serve as cultural insurance policies against this temporal amnesia. By preserving memories of past catastrophes in story form, they remind each generation that change is possible, that current conditions are temporary, and that survival depends on adaptability rather than permanence. These stories also suggest that the cycles are not entirely random or unpredictable. While we cannot know exactly when the next major reset will occur, we can recognize that such events are part of the natural history of our planet. The geological record shows that they have happened before and will happen again, following patterns that operate on timescales far longer than individual human lives, but much shorter than the age of the Earth itself. Understanding these cycles changes how we interpret both the past and the future. The apparent sudden emergence of civilizations in the archaeological record might represent not first developments but recoveries from earlier resets. The gaps and discontinuities in human history might reflect not absent evidence but successful erasure by the cycling forces of planetary change. Similarly, our own civilization's remarkable achievements might be not unique innovations, but rediscoveries of capabilities that have been developed and lost multiple times. The technologies we consider advanced might seem primitive to civilizations that learn to work with these planetary cycles rather than despite them, developing resilient strategies that allowed knowledge and culture to survive through periods of catastrophic change. The cycles of fire, flood, and ice remind us that we live on a dynamic planet that has never remained static for long periods. They suggest that permanence is an illusion, that adaptation is the key to survival, and that the story of human civilization might be far more complex and cyclical than we usually imagine. As we settle into sleep, we might reflect on how these great cycles connect us to both the deep past and the distant future, making us part of a story that extends far beyond our own brief moment in the vast flow of planetary time. The Earth's hidden archives deep within the layers of ice, rock, and sediment that make up our planet's crust lies a vast archive of information about Earth's past. This natural library contains records of climate changes, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and mass extinctions that extend back millions of years. When we learn to read these records carefully, they reveal a planet that has been repeatedly transformed by catastrophic events, a world that has been reset many times throughout its long history. Ice cores extracted from Antarctica and Greenland provide some of the most detailed and precise records of ancient climates. As snow falls and compresses into ice over thousands of years, it traps tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere, preserving samples of the air that people breathed in ages long past. These ice cores contain layers like the rings of a tree, with each annual accumulation of snow creating a distinct band that can be counted and analyzed. Within these frozen archives, scientists have found evidence of sudden and dramatic climate changes that occurred with shocking speed. Periods of stability lasting thousands of years were interrupted by transitions so rapid that average temperatures changed by more than 10 degrees Celsius within just a few decades. Such changes would be devastating to any complex society, forcing mass migrations and making established agricultural systems impossible to maintain. One of the most striking examples appears in ice cores from around 12,800 years ago, marking the beginning of the Younger Dryas period. After several thousand years of gradual warming as the last ice age ended, global temperatures suddenly plunged back toward glacial conditions and remained cold for more than a millennium before warming resumed. This climate reversal coincided with other evidence of catastrophic change, including a thin layer of unusual materials found in geological deposits worldwide. This layer contains high concentrations of iridium, a rare metal that is common in asteroids but scarce in Earth's crust. It also contains microscopic spherules of glass and metallic compounds that appear to have been formed by extremely high temperatures, the kind that would result from a large asteroid or comet impact. Some researchers interpret this evidence as proof that an extraterrestrial impact triggered the Younger Dryas cooling, though others argue for alternative explanations. Regardless of the specific cause, the ice cores show that this period of climate reversal had global effects. Atmospheric composition changed dramatically. Dust levels increased, suggesting more widespread aridity and stronger winds. Chemical signatures indicate massive forest fires burning across multiple continents. The evidence points to a world in crisis, struggling to recover from some catastrophic disruption. If human civilizations existed during this period, they would have faced challenges that would test their survival capabilities to the limit. The rapid cooling would have made agriculture impossible across vast regions. The widespread fires would have destroyed forests and grasslands that supported both human communities and the animals they hunted. The climate instability would have made long-term planning and settlement extremely difficult. Rock layers tell similar stories of sudden change and catastrophic disruption. Sedimentary rocks formed at the bottom of ancient seas preserve records of mass extinctions periods, when large percentages of Earth species disappeared from the fossil record within geologically short periods. These extinction events appear as distinct boundaries in rock formations, marked by sudden changes in the types of fossils found above and below. The most famous of these boundaries marks the end of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Here, scientists have found not only the disappearance of dinosaur fossils, but also a thin layer of rock enriched with iridium and other materials consistent with a massive asteroid impact. The evidence suggests that a celestial body roughly 6 miles in diameter struck the Earth near what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, creating an explosion equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons. The immediate effects would have been catastrophic on a global scale. The impact ejected so much debris into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked for months or possibly years. Global temperatures plummeted as the planet entered a kind of nuclear winter. Acid rain fell as vaporized rock combined with atmospheric moisture. Massive tsunamis swept across ocean basins, devastating coastal areas worldwide. But the long-term effects were equally profound. With photosynthesis disrupted by the lack of sunlight, plant ecosystems collapsed, leading to the starvation of herbivorous animals, and eventually the carnivores that fed on them. The intricate food webs that had supported dinosaur communities for over 150 million years unraveled within a matter of years or decades. This mass extinction cleared the way for entirely new forms of life to emerge. Mammals, which had been small, nocturnal creatures during the age of dinosaurs, suddenly had access to ecological niches that had been closed to them for millions of years. The world was reset, and evolution began exploring new possibilities. Similar reset events appear throughout the geological record, each one marking the end of one evolutionary era and the beginning of another. The Great Dying at the end of the Permian period eliminated more than 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. Earlier mass extinctions reshaped life in the oceans, on land, and in the air, repeatedly clearing the biological slate and forcing evolution to begin again with whatever survivors remained. Volcanic rocks preserve evidence of another type of reset mechanism. Large igneous provinces areas where massive volcanic eruptions covered hundreds of thousands of square miles with lava and ash mark some of the most severe environmental crises in Earth's history. These eruptions were not like the isolated volcanoes we see today, but sustained periods of volcanic activity that lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. The Siberian traps, formed around 252 million years ago, coincide exactly with the Great Dying that ended the Permian period. The eruptions pumped enormous quantities of greenhouse gases, toxic compounds, and ash into the atmosphere, creating acid rain, global warming, and ocean acidification on scales that nearly ended complex life on Earth. More recently, the eruption of the Deccan Traps in India may have contributed to the extinction of the dinosaurs, adding volcanic stress to the impact effects of the asteroid collision. The combination of these two catastrophic events created environmental conditions so severe that even the most successful life forms on the planet could not survive. These geological archives demonstrate that Earth has a long history of sudden, violent changes that completely transform the conditions for life. The specific mechanisms vary: asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, climate shifts, changes in ocean circulation, but the pattern is consistent. Periods of relative stability are punctuated by catastrophic events that reset the biological and environmental systems. If human civilizations have existed for much longer than conventionally recognized, they would have encountered some of these reset events. The survivors would have faced not just local disasters, but global environmental changes that disrupted the fundamental systems supporting complex society. Even if they possessed advanced technologies, they would have been vulnerable to disruptions in food production, climate stability, and resource availability. The geological record suggests that such resets occur on various timescales. Some happen within human lifetimes, like the Toba eruption that may have reduced human populations to just a few thousand individuals. Others unfold over centuries or millennia, giving societies time to adapt but ultimately overwhelming their capacity to maintain complex systems. The preservation potential of these archives means that evidence of past resets continues to accumulate in Earth's crust. Future drilling projects and analytical techniques may reveal even more detailed records of catastrophic events and their effects on both natural and human systems. The planet itself maintains a memory of its violent history, written in languages of rock and ice that we are only beginning to learn to read. As we develop better methods for interpreting these natural archives, we may discover evidence of human civilizations that existed during earlier reset events. The remains might be fragmentary and difficult to recognize, but they could be preserved in exactly the same geological layers that record the catastrophes that destroyed them. This perspective changes how we understand both the past and the future. The Earth's hidden archives remind us that we live on a dynamic, sometimes violent planet that has repeatedly experienced changes severe enough to challenge the survival of even the most successful species. They suggest that resets are not rare anomalies but regular features of planetary history, operating on timescales that challenge human memory but are short enough to affect human civilization. The question is not whether such events will occur again. The geological record shows that they inevitably will. The question is whether we will be better prepared than our predecessors to maintain continuity through the next great reset, or whether we too will become just another thin layer in the Earth's vast archive of vanished worlds. Anomalous artifacts and out-of-place objects among the most intriguing and controversial pieces of evidence for possible ancient advanced civilizations are the artifacts that seem to appear in the wrong place at the wrong time. These objects, sometimes called OOPArts for out-of-place artifacts, challenge conventional timelines by appearing to show technological sophistication or knowledge that doesn't fit with mainstream understanding of when and where such capabilities developed. While many of these artifacts have been debunked as hoaxes, misidentifications, or misinterpretations, a small number continue to puzzle researchers and resist easy explanation. If genuine, they might represent fragments of lost civilizations, technologies that were developed and forgotten, or evidence that human capabilities have been underestimated for certain time periods. The Antikythera mechanism stands as perhaps the most remarkable and well-documented example of ancient technology that seems anachronistic. Discovered in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901, this corroded bronze device initially appeared to be nothing more than a lump of oxidized metal. Only decades later, when X-ray analysis revealed its internal structure, did researchers realize they had found something extraordinary. The mechanism turns out to be an incredibly sophisticated analog computer, designed to predict the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable precision. It contains more than 30 bronze gears, arranged in complex relationships, that mirror the mathematical ratios governing planetary motions. The device could calculate the positions of the Sun, Moon, and known planets, predict eclipses, and track the complex 18.6-year cycle of lunar motion. What makes the Antikythera mechanism so puzzling is not just its sophistication, but its apparent uniqueness. Created around 100 BCE, it demonstrates a level of mechanical engineering and astronomical knowledge that doesn't appear again in European civilization for more than a millennium. The gearing system is so advanced that similar technology wasn't redeveloped until the elaborate clockwork mechanisms of the late medieval period. This raises profound questions about the continuity of technological development. If ancient Greeks could create such sophisticated devices, why didn't this technology continue to develop? Was the Antikythera mechanism the product of a brief flowering of mechanical knowledge that was then lost? Or does it represent just one example of ancient technologies that were more widespread than we realize? Recent research has revealed that the mechanism is even more complex than initially understood. High-resolution imaging has uncovered additional gear trains and inscriptions that suggest it could also predict the timing of Olympic Games and other recurring cultural events. The level of integration between astronomical calculation and cultural calendar keeping implies a sophisticated understanding of both natural cycles and human social organization. The device also shows evidence of repairs and modifications, suggesting it was used over an extended period rather than being a one-off experimental piece. This implies that the knowledge needed to create and maintain such mechanisms was available to multiple craftsmen over several generations, rather than being the isolated achievement of a single genius inventor. Similar questions arise from other ancient objects that display unexpected sophistication. The Damascus steel produced in medieval Syria and India demonstrated properties that weren't understood or replicated until modern metallurgy developed advanced techniques for analyzing and manipulating molecular structures. The steel could be forged into blades that were both incredibly sharp and remarkably flexible, qualities that seemed mutually exclusive to later metalworkers. When European crusaders encountered Damascus steel in the Middle East, they were amazed by its superiority to their own weapons. Despite centuries of effort, European smiths were unable to duplicate the technique. The knowledge of how to create Damascus steel was eventually lost even in its countries of origin, and the secret wasn't rediscovered until the 20th century, when electron microscopy revealed the complex carbon nanotube structures that gave the steel its unique properties. This pattern of advanced knowledge appearing, flourishing briefly, and then being lost repeats throughout history in various domains. Roman concrete, for example, was superior in many ways to modern concrete, capable of setting underwater and becoming stronger over time rather than weaker. The specific techniques for creating this concrete were lost during the decline of the Roman Empire, and only recently rediscovered through chemical analysis of surviving structures. More controversial are artifacts that appear to show modern-looking technology in ancient contexts. Ancient Indian texts describe flying vehicles called vimanas with sophisticated propulsion systems and navigation capabilities. While most scholars interpret these as mythological rather than technological descriptions, some researchers argue that they might preserve memories of actual aircraft or spacecraft. Similarly, some ancient Mesopotamian cylinder seals appear to show objects that look remarkably like modern electrical devices, complete with what could be interpreted as wiring, transformers, and power sources. Orthodox archaeology explains these as religious symbols or artistic conventions, but alternative researchers suggest they might represent actual electrical technology that was developed and then forgotten. Carvings in some Egyptian temples appear to show objects that look like helicopters, submarines, and other modern vehicles. These are generally explained as the result of hieroglyphic palimpsests, newer inscriptions carved over older ones, creating accidental combinations that happen to resemble modern objects. However, the resemblances are sometimes so specific that they continue to generate debate. Perhaps most intriguing are reports of artifacts found in geological contexts that predate known human presence by millions of years. These include objects like the Klerksdorp spheres, small metallic balls found in South African rock formations that are billions of years old, and various other items that appear to show deliberate human manufacture, but are found in strata far too ancient for human activity. Most of these extreme claims have been debunked through careful analysis that reveals natural formation processes or contamination of geological layers. However, the persistence of such reports raises questions about our ability to recognize very ancient artifacts and about the completeness of our understanding of natural formation processes. The challenge with anomalous artifacts is distinguishing between genuine mysteries that might expand our understanding of the past and false claims that result from misidentification, wishful thinking, or deliberate hoaxing. The scientific method requires extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims, and most proposed OOPArts fail to meet this standard when subjected to rigorous analysis. However, the existence of well-documented examples like the Antikythera mechanism demonstrates that ancient peoples were capable of much more sophisticated technologies than commonly assumed. This suggests that other artifacts might await proper recognition and analysis, hidden in museum collections or archaeological sites that have not been examined with appropriate techniques. The preservation bias in archaeology also means that most ancient artifacts, especially those made of organic materials or common metals, would have decayed completely over thousands of years. The few that survive represent a tiny fraction of what once existed, and they might not be representative of the full range of ancient technological capabilities. If civilizations did rise and fall in cyclical patterns, we would expect to find exactly the kind of scattered, anomalous artifacts that puzzle researchers today. Most evidence would be erased by time and natural processes, but occasional fragments might survive in unusual conditions or contexts. These remnants would appear isolated and mysterious because the cultural context that created them would have been lost. The study of anomalous artifacts requires a careful balance between skepticism and openness. While most claims of out-of-place objects turn out to be mistaken, the occasional genuine discovery can dramatically revise our understanding of ancient capabilities. The key is applying rigorous analytical methods while remaining open to the possibility that the past might have been more complex and sophisticated than we currently recognize. As analytical techniques continue to improve, we may be able to extract more information from ancient artifacts and identify genuine examples of advanced technology that have been overlooked or misinterpreted. The archives of museums around the world likely contain objects whose true significance has not yet been recognized, waiting for new methods of analysis to reveal their secrets. These investigations might not prove the existence of lost civilizations with technology equal to our own, but they could demonstrate that human innovation and technical skill have deeper roots than commonly acknowledged. Each genuine anomalous artifact expands our appreciation for ancient human capabilities and reminds us that the simple narrative of linear technological progress might be missing important chapters in the complex story of human achievement. The limitations of written history when we consider the scope of human history. One of the most striking facts is how brief the period of written records actually is. Human beings have existed in their modern form for at least 200,000 years, possibly much longer, yet writing systems only emerged around 5,000 years ago. This means that more than 95% of human existence occurred without any written documentation, leaving vast expanses of time about which we know almost nothing beyond what can be inferred from archaeological remains. This disproportion shapes our understanding of the past in profound ways. Written history creates an illusion of completeness and continuity that may not reflect the actual complexity of human experience over deep time. Because writing preserves so much detail about societies that possessed it, these literate civilizations seem vivid and real to us. By contrast, the thousands of generations that lived before writing seem shadowy and primitive, as though they were somehow less fully human than their literate descendants. But this perspective represents a fundamental bias in how we evaluate evidence. The absence of writing does not necessarily indicate the absence of sophisticated culture, complex knowledge, or even advanced technology. It may simply mean that the methods these societies used to preserve and transmit information have not survived in forms we can easily recognize or interpret. Oral traditions, for example, were the primary means of cultural transmission for most of human history. In societies that relied entirely on spoken communication, vast amounts of knowledge could be preserved across many generations through carefully maintained traditions of storytelling, song, and ritual performance. Professional memory keepers, bards, priests, and elder councils dedicated their lives to maintaining the accuracy of important cultural information. Studies of contemporary oral cultures demonstrate that such traditions can preserve historically accurate information for surprisingly long periods. Aboriginal Australian cultures, for instance, maintain oral traditions that include verifiable references to events that occurred more than 10,000 years ago, including the flooding of coastal areas as sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Similarly, the oral traditions of Pacific Island cultures preserve navigational knowledge of extraordinary sophistication. Polynesian navigators could sail across thousands of miles of open ocean using only their knowledge of star positions, wave patterns, and seasonal wind changes, all preserved in songs, chants, and stories passed down through generations of seafarers. Yet these remarkable achievements of memory and cultural transmission remain largely invisible to conventional archaeology. Oral knowledge leaves no physical traces unless it is eventually written down or embedded in material artifacts. When cultures that depend on oral tradition are disrupted by war, disease, or environmental catastrophe, their accumulated wisdom can disappear within a single generation. This fragility of oral knowledge becomes particularly significant when we consider the possibility of cyclical resets. Any global catastrophe severe enough to scatter populations and disrupt social structures would likely destroy most oral traditions along with the institutions that maintain them. The survivors would be forced to focus on immediate needs, leaving little time or energy for preserving complex cultural knowledge that might seem irrelevant to basic survival. Even when oral traditions do survive through difficult periods, they often undergo significant transformation. Stories change as they are retold, adapting to new circumstances and audiences. Historical events become mythologized, practical knowledge gets embedded in religious narratives, and the original meanings of cultural practices may be lost even as the practices themselves continue. This process of transformation means that oral traditions might preserve memories of earlier civilizations in forms that we don't recognize as historical records. What we interpret as mythology or religious symbolism might contain kernels of actual history, describing real events and real achievements in metaphorical language that has obscured their literal content over thousands of years of retelling. The development of writing itself represents both a great achievement and a great vulnerability for civilization. Writing allows for the accumulation and precise transmission of knowledge in ways that oral tradition cannot match. Complex mathematics, detailed astronomical observations, elaborate legal codes, and sophisticated philosophical systems all become possible once writing systems develop. But written records are also fragile in their own ways. They depend on physical materials, clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, parchment books that decay rapidly under most conditions. They require institutional support to maintain libraries, schools, and scribal traditions. And they are vulnerable to deliberate destruction by conquering armies, religious fanatics, or political revolutionaries who want to erase the cultural achievements of their enemies. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria has become a symbol of how easily written knowledge can be lost. This great repository of ancient learning, which may have contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls representing the accumulated wisdom of the Mediterranean world, was gradually diminished and eventually destroyed through a combination of political upheaval, religious conflict, and simple neglect. With its destruction, countless works of literature, science, philosophy, and history vanished forever. But Alexandria was not unique. Throughout history, libraries and archives have been destroyed by wars, fires, floods, and deliberate vandalism. The Library of Nalanda in India, which may have contained millions of texts on Buddhism, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, was burned by invading armies in the 12th century. The destruction took months to complete, suggesting the vast scale of knowledge that was lost. Even when written records survive individual catastrophes, they remain vulnerable to the broader disruptions that accompany civilizational collapse. Writing systems themselves can be forgotten when the institutions that maintain literacy disappear. The Maya abandoned their cities and largely ceased producing written texts, leaving their sophisticated hieroglyphic system to decay, until modern scholars finally began to decipher it in the 20th century. Similarly, the Linear B script used by Mycenaean Greeks was completely forgotten when that civilization collapsed around 1200 BCE. For more than 3,000 years, tablets inscribed with Linear B remained undeciphered, their contents as mysterious as if they had been written by aliens. Only in 1952 did Michael Ventris succeed in showing that the script recorded an early form of Greek, revealing administrative records from a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that had been almost entirely forgotten. These examples illustrate how quickly and completely written knowledge can disappear during periods of social disruption. If global resets have occurred multiple times throughout human history, they would have created exactly the conditions necessary to destroy most written records and render the survivors illiterate within a few generations. The geographic concentration of early writing systems also made them vulnerable to regional catastrophes. Mesopotamian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese characters, and Mesoamerican glyphs all developed in specific geographical areas and remained largely confined to those regions for centuries or millennia. A major environmental catastrophe or social collapse in any of these areas could have eliminated entire writing traditions before they had a chance to spread more widely. This concentration effect means that the loss of written knowledge might be even more complete than we usually imagine. If advanced civilizations developed writing systems during earlier cycles, but remained geographically isolated, their destruction might have left no trace in regions that later developed their own independent writing traditions. The materials used for writing also affect the likelihood of long-term preservation. Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets, baked clay objects that are virtually indestructible under most conditions, have survived for thousands of years and continue to yield new information about ancient societies. Egyptian papyrus scrolls, by contrast, survive only in the dry climate of Egypt itself and have been almost entirely lost in regions with more humid conditions. If earlier civilizations used different materials for writing, wood, bark, textiles, or organic substances that have completely decayed, their written records might have vanished so completely that we have no indication they ever existed. The survival of ancient texts is largely a matter of chance, dependent on favorable environmental conditions and the accident of being buried in just the right circumstances. The selectivity of what gets written down also shapes our understanding of ancient societies. Written records typically focus on the concerns of elites' religious ceremonies, political events, economic transactions, and military campaigns. The daily lives, technical knowledge, and cultural practices of ordinary people are often poorly documented or completely absent from written sources. This bias means that even when written records do survive, they may not capture the full range of knowledge and capabilities that ancient societies possessed. Practical techniques, artistic traditions, and informal social institutions might have been transmitted orally even in literate societies, making them vulnerable to loss during periods of disruption. The relatively recent development of writing also means that the vast majority of human cultural development occurred without written documentation. The development of language itself, the domestication of plants and animals, the invention of agriculture, the creation of the first tools and weapons, the discovery of fire, all of these fundamental achievements happened before writing existed to record them. If complex civilizations rose and fell during the pre-literate period of human history, they could have achieved remarkable things while leaving virtually no written evidence of their existence. Their knowledge would have been preserved in oral traditions, material artifacts, and institutional practices, all of which are much more vulnerable to complete loss than written records. The absence of written evidence from earlier periods cannot be taken as proof that nothing significant occurred during those times. It may simply reflect the limitations of writing as a preservation medium and the vulnerability of all human knowledge to the disruptions caused by environmental catastrophe and social collapse. This perspective encourages a more humble approach to interpreting the past. Rather than assuming that the earliest written records represent the beginning of human achievement, we might consider them as simply the earliest evidence that happened to survive in forms we can currently recognize and interpret. The silence of the pre-literate past might conceal entire chapters of human history, civilizations that rose and fell, knowledge that was developed and lost, achievements that were accomplished and forgotten. The development of writing represents not the beginning of human intelligence, but simply the beginning of our current ability to preserve and access detailed information about complex societies. As we drift toward sleep, we might reflect on how much of human experience remains unrecorded and unknown. The thoughts, dreams, discoveries, and achievements of countless generations have vanished as completely as if they never existed, leaving us with only fragments and mysteries to suggest the rich complexity of lives lived in times before writing captured and preserved human experience for future examination. This vast ocean of unrecorded time reminds us that our own written records, impressive as they may seem, represent only a tiny fraction of human experience. Most of what we do, think, and discover will also be forgotten, joining the great silence that surrounds the brief illuminated moments that survive in writing. The story of humanity is far larger and more mysterious than the portion that has been written down, and the deepest truths about our species may lie not in what we have recorded, but in what we have lost. Could we be the latest cycle? As we piece together all these fragments, the geological evidence of repeated catastrophes, the myths of destruction and renewal, the puzzling gaps in the archaeological record, the anomalous artifacts that don't fit our timelines, a profound question emerges. Could our own civilization be just the latest expression of a pattern that has repeated many times before? Are we unique in the history of our planet, or are we following paths that others have walked before us? This possibility is both humbling and unsettling. We have grown accustomed to thinking of ourselves as the pinnacle of human achievement, the first generation to develop advanced technology, the initial explorers of science and space. Our accomplishments seem so remarkable, our knowledge so vast, that it feels natural to assume we represent something unprecedented in the history of our species. Yet, when we examine our situation more closely, we find ourselves facing many of the same challenges that have confronted every complex society throughout history. We depend on stable climate patterns that geological evidence shows are temporary. We have built our cities along coastlines that have risen and fallen many times in the past. We rely on global trade networks and specialized technologies that could be disrupted by the same types of catastrophes that have repeatedly reset the world before. The patterns we see in ancient myths and archaeological evidence suggest that previous civilizations may have felt the same confidence in their permanence that we feel today. The builders of lost cities beneath the sea probably believed their achievements would endure forever. The creators of sophisticated monuments and precise astronomical instruments likely saw themselves as the culmination of human progress, rather than just another step in an ongoing cycle. Our own rapid technological development might actually support the idea that we are part of a cyclical pattern, rather than evidence against it. The speed with which human societies can advance when conditions are favorable is remarkable. In just a few centuries, we have gone from horse-drawn transportation to space travel, from hand-copied manuscripts to global digital networks, from local tribal groups to an interconnected planetary civilization. This rapid pace of development suggests that similar advances could have occurred multiple times in the past, given the right environmental and social conditions. A civilization that had thousands of years of stability could potentially achieve remarkable sophistication before being disrupted by the kind of catastrophic events that the geological record shows occur regularly on planetary timescales. The cyclical interpretation also helps explain some puzzling aspects of our own development. Why do so many of our technologies seem to build on principles that were understood, at least partially, by much earlier cultures? Ancient peoples demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, metallurgy, and engineering that seems inconsistent with their supposedly primitive social and technological development. Rather than representing isolated achievements by exceptionally gifted individuals, these ancient accomplishments might reflect fragments of knowledge that had been developed more fully in earlier cycles, but was only partially preserved through periods of reset and cultural collapse. Our rediscovery of these principles might be exactly that rediscovery rather than original invention. The myths and legends that speak of golden ages, lost wisdom, and civilizations destroyed by catastrophe might preserve cultural memories of actual earlier cycles. These stories appear in cultures around the world with such consistency that they suggest either universal human psychological patterns or shared historical experiences that have been preserved in mythological form. If we are indeed part of a cyclical pattern, it raises profound questions about the nature of progress and the destiny of our own civilization. Are we truly advancing towards some permanent achievement of human potential, or are we simply repeating patterns that have played out before and will play out again? The geological and climatic forces that have reset the world in the past continue to operate today. Ice ages will return, as they have throughout Earth's history. Volcanic supereruptions remain possible, as do asteroid impacts and other catastrophic events. Climate change, whether caused by human activity or natural cycles, could disrupt the stable conditions that support our current level of complexity. Our global interconnectedness, which seems like a strength, might actually represent a vulnerability that makes us more susceptible to complete reset than smaller, more isolated civilizations. A disruption that affects global trade, communication, or energy systems could cascade through our interconnected networks, potentially causing a civilizational collapse more complete than anything experienced by previous societies. Yet this cyclical perspective also offers hope and guidance. If previous civilizations have faced similar challenges, and some have managed to preserve knowledge through periods of disruption, we might learn from their experiences. The megalithic monuments that seem designed to encode astronomical and mathematical knowledge in permanent stone might represent attempts by earlier societies to create reset-resistant repositories of their most important discoveries. The myths and oral traditions that preserve memories of destruction and renewal might contain practical wisdom about how to survive catastrophic change and maintain cultural continuity through difficult periods. Rather than dismissing these stories as primitive superstition, we might study them as survival guides created by people who had experienced the kinds of disruptions we may face in our own future. Our current technological capabilities also give us advantages that previous civilizations might not have possessed. We can monitor global climate patterns, track potentially dangerous asteroids, and communicate instantly across the planet. We have the theoretical knowledge to recognize the signs of coming catastrophes and the technological tools to potentially mitigate their effects. But these advantages come with the responsibility to use them wisely. If we are the latest cycle in a recurring pattern, we have the opportunity to break that pattern by developing more resilient and sustainable ways of organizing human society. We might become the first civilization to survive a major reset by preparing for it rather than being surprised by it. This preparation would require acknowledging the possibility that our current achievements are temporary, that the conditions supporting our complex society could change rapidly, and that survival might depend more on adaptability than on the preservation of specific technologies or social structures. It would also require developing methods for preserving essential knowledge through periods of disruption, creating multiple redundant systems for maintaining scientific understanding, technical skills, and cultural wisdom even if existing institutions collapse. The challenge would be ensuring that survivors of a reset would have access to the tools and knowledge needed to rebuild more quickly and perhaps more wisely than before. Whether we are truly unique or simply the latest expression of recurring human potential, our situation demands both humility about our permanence and determination to create something better than what came before. If we are part of a cycle, our goal might be not to prevent all future resets, but to ensure that whatever follows us builds on our achievements rather than having to rediscover everything from the beginning. As we settle into sleep, we might reflect on our place in the vast sweep of planetary time. We are part of a story that stretches far beyond our individual lives, connected to both past and future cycles of human development that we can barely imagine. Whether we represent the culmination of that story or simply another chapter in an ongoing narrative, our responsibility remains the same: to contribute what we can to the long human journey through time and change. What if Earth resets again? As we lie here in the quiet of approaching sleep, a sobering question presents itself. What would it mean for us if Earth were to reset again? This is not merely an abstract philosophical puzzle, but a practical consideration that touches on the deepest questions of human survival, cultural preservation, and the continuation of consciousness itself across the great ruptures that have marked our planet's history. The possibility of another reset forces us to confront the fragility of everything we take for granted. Our cities, built proudly along coastlines and river valleys, would be among the first casualties if rising seas or catastrophic floods swept across the landscape. The glass towers of our metropolises, which seem so permanent and substantial, would prove as temporary as sand castles when faced with the kinds of forces that have reshaped the Earth many times before. Consider how quickly the foundations of our complex society could crumble. Our global economy depends on transportation networks that span continents and oceans. Our food systems rely on predictable weather patterns and stable agricultural regions. Our technology requires rare earth elements extracted from specific geographical locations and refined through industrial processes that depend on enormous amounts of energy and coordination. A major climate shift could disrupt agriculture so severely that food shortages would force the abandonment of cities and the collapse of governments. A series of volcanic eruptions could fill the atmosphere with ash, blocking sunlight and triggering a global winter that would make modern agriculture impossible. An asteroid impact could generate tsunamis that would sweep away coastal civilizations and create environmental chaos that would persist for years. Even without such dramatic catastrophes, more gradual changes could prove equally devastating to our current way of life. The slow rise of sea levels, the progressive desertification of agricultural regions, or the gradual breakdown of climate patterns could force massive population migrations that would overwhelm political and social institutions. But the physical destruction would be only the beginning. Perhaps more significant would be the loss of knowledge and cultural achievement that a reset would entail. Our civilization has accumulated an enormous amount of specialized information that exists primarily in digital form or in the minds of technical specialists. This knowledge is far more vulnerable than we usually recognize. If global communication networks failed and educational institutions collapsed, much of our scientific and technical knowledge could disappear within a single generation. The principles behind nuclear physics, genetic engineering, computer science, and advanced manufacturing are understood by relatively small numbers of specialists. Without the institutional structures that support these fields, the knowledge they possess would be lost as surely as if it had never been discovered. Even more basic technical skills could disappear surprisingly quickly. Most people in modern society lack the knowledge needed to produce their own food, construct permanent shelter, or create basic tools without access to industrial supply chains. In a reset scenario, survivors would be forced to rediscover techniques that previous generations took for granted. The psychological and cultural dimensions of a reset might be even more devastating than the physical and technological losses. Modern humans have grown accustomed to a level of comfort, security, and predictability that would vanish completely in a reset scenario. The shock of losing not just individual possessions, but entire ways of life could be traumatic on a scale that would affect human behavior for generations. Survivors would face the challenge of maintaining hope and purpose in a world where all familiar landmarks, physical, social, and cultural, had disappeared. They would need to create new forms of meaning and identity from the fragments of what remained, while simultaneously focusing on the practical challenges of survival in a changed environment. The social structures that support complex civilization would also face enormous pressure. Democratic governments, legal systems, educational institutions, and economic markets all depend on stability and predictability to function effectively. In the chaos following a reset, these sophisticated social technologies might give way to simpler, more authoritarian forms of organization focused primarily on survival and resource allocation. Yet history suggests that humans are remarkably resilient and adaptable. Previous resets, if they occurred, did not eliminate humanity but provided opportunities for new forms of civilization to emerge. The survivors of each cycle managed to preserve enough knowledge and cultural continuity to eventually rebuild complex societies, often achieving levels of sophistication that matched or exceeded what came before. This resilience offers both hope and guidance for how we might prepare for potential future resets. Rather than assuming that our current achievements represent permanent progress that cannot be reversed, we might focus on developing more robust and adaptable systems that could survive disruption. One approach would be to create multiple redundant repositories of essential knowledge, stored in forms that could survive catastrophic events and remain accessible to survivors with limited technological resources. This might include physical libraries designed to withstand natural disasters, information encoded in extremely durable materials, and educational systems that emphasize practical skills alongside theoretical knowledge. Another strategy would be to develop more decentralized and self-sufficient communities that could maintain basic civilizational functions even if global networks collapsed. Rather than depending entirely on complex supply chains and specialized institutions, local communities might cultivate the knowledge and resources needed to provide food, shelter, healthcare, and education for their members. The preservation of cultural and ethical values might be even more important than the preservation of technical knowledge. The principles of human dignity, intellectual curiosity, artistic expression, and social cooperation that we consider essential to civilization could guide the rebuilding process and help ensure that whatever emerges from a reset reflects the best aspects of human nature rather than merely the struggle for survival. We might also consider how to prepare future generations psychologically for the possibility of major disruption. Rather than teaching that progress is inevitable and permanent, educational systems might emphasize adaptability, resilience, and the cyclical nature of historical change. Students might learn not just how current systems work, but how they might be rebuilt if they were destroyed. The question of whether Earth will reset again is not really whether such events will occur. Geological evidence suggests they are inevitable over long time periods, but when they will happen, and whether we will be prepared for them. Our choice is not between preventing all future disruptions and accepting total destruction, but between conscious preparation and unconscious vulnerability. If we are indeed part of a cyclical pattern, then our responsibility extends beyond preserving our own achievements to preparing for the continued development of human civilization across multiple cycles. We might become the first society to deliberately design for continuity through catastrophic change, creating systems and institutions that could guide the rebuilding process and help ensure that future cycles build upon rather than merely repeat what came before. This perspective transforms the question of reset from a source of despair into a challenge for creative problem solving. Rather than assuming that our current way of life represents the permanent destiny of our species, we might see it as one experiment among many, with the opportunity to design better experiments that could survive the tests that await them. As we prepare for sleep, we might reflect on our place within these vast cycles of destruction and renewal. We are part of a species that has already survived multiple near extinctions and civilizational collapses, demonstrating a remarkable capacity for adaptation and recovery. Whether the future brings gradual change or sudden catastrophe, we carry within us the same resilience and creativity that has allowed humanity to persist through all previous challenges. The possibility of future resets reminds us to value what we have while recognizing its temporary nature. It encourages us to preserve what is most important while remaining open to change and growth. Most importantly, it connects us to the long story of human persistence through time, making us partners with both past and future generations in the ongoing experiment of consciousness seeking to understand and survive in an ever-changing universe. The eternal return. As our journey through these possibilities draws toward its close, we find ourselves contemplating a pattern that extends far beyond human history into the very nature of existence itself. The cycles of destruction and renewal that may have shaped human civilization reflect larger rhythms that operate throughout the natural world, seasons that turn from growth to decay to rebirth, stellar cycles that create and destroy solar systems, evolutionary patterns that see species emerge, flourish, and give way to new forms of life. If Earth has indeed been reset thousands of times, then we are part of something far grander and more mysterious than a simple story of progress from primitive to advanced. We are participants in an eternal return, a cosmic dance of creation and destruction that has been playing out for billions of years, and will continue long after our current civilization has become a memory. This perspective transforms how we understand both achievement and loss. Our greatest accomplishments become not permanent monuments to human genius, but temporary expressions of possibilities that may be explored again and again in different forms. The knowledge we accumulate, the beauty we create, the wisdom we discover all may return in new variations, as consciousness continues its long exploration of what is possible within the constraints of physical existence. The myths and legends that speak of golden ages and lost civilizations might therefore be more than cultural memories of specific historical events. They might reflect a deep, intuitive understanding of the cyclical nature of existence itself, the recognition that what has been will be again, that patterns repeat across scales of time too vast for ordinary comprehension. In this view, the silence of the deep past becomes not an absence, but a presence, the accumulated memory of countless cycles stored in the very fabric of reality. Each reset clears the surface, but leaves deeper patterns intact, allowing consciousness to rediscover eternal truths through fresh exploration and experience. The megalithic monuments that seem designed to survive catastrophic change take on new significance as attempts to create permanence within cycles of change. They represent humanity's intuitive understanding that physical forms are temporary, but that certain patterns, relationships, and proportions reflect enduring truths that can be rediscovered by any consciousness sophisticated enough to recognize them. Our own technological achievements might follow similar patterns. The mathematical principles underlying our science, the aesthetic proportions that guide our art, the ethical insights that shape our societies, these might represent rediscoveries of truths that have been found and lost and found again, countless times throughout the long history of consciousness on Earth. This cyclical perspective offers both humility and hope. It suggests that our failures are not permanent defeats, and our successes are not unique achievements, but temporary expressions within a larger pattern that allows for endless exploration and development. Each cycle provides new opportunities to explore different possibilities, to emphasize different aspects of human potential, to experiment with alternative approaches to the fundamental challenges of existence. The question then becomes not whether we can create something permanent, but whether we can contribute something valuable to the ongoing exploration of consciousness in the physical universe. Our role might be to add our own unique notes to a symphony that has been playing for eons and will continue long after our individual parts have ended. If resets are indeed part of the natural pattern of existence, then our goal might be not to prevent them, but to ensure that what emerges from them carries forward the most valuable insights from what came before. We might focus on discovering and preserving the deepest truths about existence, consciousness, and value, truths that could guide future cycles regardless of their specific technological or social forms. This perspective encourages a different relationship with time and achievement. Instead of rushing to accumulate as much as possible before the inevitable end, we might focus on contributing to patterns of understanding and wisdom that could persist across cycles. Instead of fearing change and loss, we might embrace the opportunity to participate in the eternal exploration of possibility. The eternal return also suggests that nothing valuable is ever truly lost. Even if specific achievements disappear and particular civilizations crumble, the consciousness that created them persists in new forms, carrying forward the capacity to rediscover and perhaps exceed what came before. Each cycle builds on the accumulated wisdom of all previous cycles, even when that wisdom is not consciously remembered. In this light, the apparent repetition becomes not meaningless redundancy but creative exploration consciousness, examining the same eternal questions from countless different angles, discovering new facets of truth through diverse approaches and experiences. Each cycle provides a different lens through which to view the fundamental mysteries of existence. As we settle into the peaceful darkness that precedes sleep, we might envision ourselves as participants in this vast cosmic process. We are temporary expressions of an eternal consciousness that has been exploring the possibilities of existence for billions of years, and will continue that exploration for billions more. Our individual lives, our particular civilization, our specific moment in history, all are unique and valuable contributions to a story that is far larger than any of its individual chapters. The resets that may have shaped Earth's past and may shape its future become not sources of fear, but reminders of the dynamic, creative nature of existence itself. They represent the universe's way of ensuring that consciousness never becomes trapped in any single form, but continues to grow, explore, and discover new possibilities for understanding and experiencing reality. Whether we are the first technological civilization or the latest in a long series, whether our achievements will last for millennia or disappear tomorrow, we remain part of an eternal pattern that gives meaning to both our struggles and our successes. In participating consciously in this pattern, we connect ourselves to the deepest rhythms of existence and find our place within the infinite creativity of the cosmos. The Earth's hidden cycles remind us that we are not separate from nature, but part of its deepest processes. The resets that may have shaped the past are not external catastrophes that happen to us, but expressions of the same creative forces that brought us into existence and that continue to evolve consciousness toward ever greater complexity and understanding. As sleep approaches and our consciousness prepares to cycle through its own patterns of rest and renewal, we rest in the knowledge that we are part of something beautiful, meaningful, and eternal. Whether tomorrow brings continued stability or the beginning of another great change, we remain connected to the endless exploration of what it means to be conscious in a universe that never stops creating new possibilities for wonder, discovery, and growth. In the eternal return, every ending becomes a beginning, every loss makes space for new discoveries, and every reset provides fresh opportunities for consciousness to explore the infinite possibilities that lie hidden within the apparent simplicity of existence. We are the universe becoming aware of itself, and that awareness continues across all cycles, all changes, all apparent endings and beginnings. Sleep well, knowing that you are part of this eternal story, a unique and irreplaceable note in the cosmic symphony that plays on through endless cycles of darkness and light, destruction and creation, forgetting and remembering. In the morning, whether in this cycle or some future one, consciousness will once again open its eyes to explore the eternal mystery of existence, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom of all who came before, and preparing the way for all who will come after. The earth resets, consciousness continues, and the exploration of what is possible goes on forever, world without end, in cycles vast and beautiful beyond our wildest dreams.